Two legends, one company, and over 20 years of shaping this myco community. Tonight, I'm talking to the pioneers of Spore Works, John Workman and Robert Hess. Stick around because this is a conversation you do not want to miss. Yo, welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast, where we explore the fascinating world of mushrooms and the people who love them. From expert cultivators to passionate foragers, we bring you deep conversations, cutting-edge insights, and everything mycology. Whether you're a seasoned mycophile or just curious, we invite you to geek out with us on the wonders of fungi and join the mushroom movement. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to the MycoGeeky Podcast, the only place where geeking out over mushrooms is like a badge of honor and not a reason to change the subject at parties. I'm your host, MycoGeeky, just here to dig deeper into this world of mushrooms and cultivation so you can take your at-home mushroom cultivation game from like pretty good to holy spore, how did you do that? We got an epic show for you tonight, so grab your lab coat or your favorite hoodie and let's get growing. Tonight, I'm honored to welcome two pioneers in the world of mycology to this show. John Workman and Robert Hess, the visionary team behind Spore Works. Since 1998, these guys have been at the forefront of the myco scene, building one of the longest running and most trusted sources for high quality spores, while deeply impacting this vibrant community of enthusiasts and researchers. Now, quick side note, Spore Works is a proud supporter of this episode. And honestly, I could not be more thrilled to finally get a chance to sit down with these guys and get to know them and hear their story. For over 20 years, Spore Works has stood as a beacon of reliability, safety, innovation. You know, they've been here the whole time, right with us, evolving every step of the way. Tonight, we're going to uncover the story behind Spore Works, the values that have driven their success, the lessons they've learned, and the philosophy that has guided them through every single year, all 20 some of them. But before diving into Spore Works' incredible journey, let's take things back to where it all began. John, let's start with you. You've been watching the show for a while now, so I know you know where this is going. Please tell me your very first mushroom memory.
Wow. I don't know if I can think that far back.
It wasn't a core memory, huh?
Well, I've always been really interested in nature. I guess you could call me a naturalist. Always, especially if it was something I could eat.
I like it.
So if it's shellfish or mushrooms or plants, that always really interested me. So I really focus on that sort of thing. And mushrooms, I live in the Pacific Northwest. I've always lived in the Pacific Northwest, and there's mushrooms everywhere, and everybody knows about mushrooms. There's lots of edible mushrooms, and when I was a kid, mushroom buyers moved into town after I was pretty well versed in mushrooms. So it was the matsutake mushrooms, the money mushrooms that were being shipped to Japan when Japan's economy was booming and they were buying everything. And I was familiar with those mushrooms, and we were just picking them for food and for fun. And we saw one of these mushroom buyers, and we took them in there, and they gave us $60 on the spot. And at the time, and that was in the 80s, we thought we were rich. This is like $60 for doing something we already love. And my friend, he ran with it. He was from a less privileged upbringing, and there was even more to him, and he turned it into almost a business. He was making like $5,000 a year just picking those mushrooms and selling them to the mushroom buyers. But yeah, that was kind of, I was already well into the mushrooms. Then when I went to college at OSU, a guy, I think because I had a car, he said, "Hey, we can go to this field. We can pick these hallucinogenic mushrooms." Like, oh, that sounds cool. And it was a farmer's field, and he had a little place where you'd sign in and give them $5, and then you could just pick until your back was breaking. And Yeah.
Wow, it's like selling firewood in front of your house, right? Like we live by a campground, and so of course we sold firewood in front of the house. And this guy's just got a sign that says, "Come pick my."
No. It wasn't a sign, but he did have like a clipboard hanging off of his door.
Still.
And you looked at the other people that signed in, and none of the names were real. It was like Donald Duck and that's a crap. It was just for his own legal protection, I guess.
Sure.
But yeah, it was Liberty Caps, and man, it was just plugged with them. You could pick forever, I think. And when we showed up, he wasn't there. He wasn't home. So we just went out and started picking. And then when we were getting ready to leave, he goes, "Hey, don't you think you owe me something?" And I go, "Yeah, man, not a problem."
That's a nice friendly scam.
I don't know if that's not a scam.
But he shows up at the end after you got all the
Well, we were trespassing. We didn't have permission.
Oh, okay. All right. So he had every right to
Oh, yeah.
Sounds like a serious deal to me.
He was pretty grim. I think he thought we were just gonna like, screw you and just drive off. But no, I was more than happy to pay him.
Nice.
And that was the first hallucinogenic mushroom I was had ever picked or ever even seen. And I got really interested from then. And I guess people thought I knew what I was doing because they would always bring me mushrooms and say, "Are these them? Are these them?" And I barely knew at the time, but they were picking a lot of Pinolius that were wrong. And one girl, she said she had a bad reaction, and it was she had eaten a bunch of mushrooms that she thought were hallucinogens. I never did get to see what they were, but she had that I think it's like mascarin poisoning or something. It's where you get the sweats. She was like perspiring profusely, but it wasn't anything serious. But people were just eating mushrooms kind of willy-nilly. There wasn't a lot of information. I mean, there were guidebooks and stuff, but that's about it. I mean, there was no internet at that time. The dark ages.
Before Al Gore.
Old school. Very, very old school. Very old school, yes. Way before Al Gore. Yeah.
But then after that, I mean, you could only pick those seasonally, right? And it was like November. In Eugene, there's this head shop called Lazar's Bazaar, and they had this homestead mushroom kit on the shelf. And I go, "Oh, that's interesting." And they had a bunch of books. I bought all the books. I bought the kit. And I'm going, "I'm going to make money, like so much money. No one knows how to do this. I'm smart." And I kind of got pretty far into it, but I never ended up growing more than one tiny mushroom. And I just filled my dorm room with fungus gnats. It was kind of a mess. And it was hard to do anything because it was a dorm, and I'd have to go down to the kitchenette and try to do the pressure cooker, and I told people I was making granola, and everybody wanted some, and I can't give you that.
Yeah, pressure cooking granola, that makes sense. Totally believable.
Well, it was grains and
Sure. Oh, that's funny.
But yeah, that was a complete fail.
So now, but tell me, just because this is in the 80s, where we at?
Yeah, 80s,
okay.
Late 80s, mid 80s.
Okay, so I mean, so you bought one of these kits. You're like, "I can do this." So what was the grain? What was in the kit? I'm just curious for the
kit. The kit was really basic. So it had a couple of test tubes with some rye grain in it, not sterilized. You had to do that yourself. And some petri dishes and some auger, a couple of tools that had an inoculating loop and a little scalpel. It was $75 at the time, which was just outrageous. It was just that's like
outrageous now,
right?
And a tiny little spore print. I think it was like a quarter of a spore print on a piece of paper in a glassine envelope. I don't think there was anything else. A little guide on how to do it. But that's how I learned how to do auger. And I was pretty good at that. It was because everything was composted then at that time. Nobody was like fruiting directly from grain or rice flour or anything like that. It was compost. Everything said you got to grow the cubes on the compost. And that's where I made the mistake. As I don't have compost. So I just went down to the garden store and bought a bag of compost, and I figured it was ready to go, and it was not. You just can't throw grain on just out of the bag compost and expect it to work. I got a lot of flies.
Oh yeah, I mean it was a buffet. You fed the gnats. They loved you. We do not get a lot of people on the show who have the pre-internet, the pre, plethora of educational opportunities for all this. It's really cool to hear what that kit. That's why I want to know that kit.
Yeah. I think it was the Homestead kit, if I'm not mistaken, that was responsible for the whole California debacle, right? Like,
yeah, that's probably true.
Shipped out of Alaska maybe at the time, and you could this is like, I'm not going to date myself with John. I went to college in the late 90s at least. So but at the time it was High Times, right? High Times is the magazine where you would go for all the classifieds for whatever, right? And so I think that was where this company, Homestead whatever Supply, had this ad for the $75 mushroom kit. I guess some places sold it in store, but I believe it was the kit that ultimately ended up in the whole debacle that ended up with California ultimately outlawing spore possession, was because somebody was able to order that kit and some nefarious stuff happened afterwards and legislation was demanded. But yeah, that era was interesting for sure. They were trying to get away with a lot. I mean, pre-spore syringe, nobody knew what a spore syringe was.
Oh yeah, that's pre-PF Tech.
Pre all the techs.
With that kit, coming back to the kit, there was like a note in it that said it used to come with an alcohol lamp. And to cut costs, it said, yeah, there's no alcohol lamp now. What we're going to give you is those alcohol wipes. And you cut that open and you light it. And you use that to sterilize your scalpel.
Interesting.
So it might have been a better value at one time if you got an actual alcohol lamp, but then they threw in a couple of alcohol wipes as a substitute. You were supposed to catch on fire.
Yeah, maybe, I don't know. Maybe just don't include the fire tools.
Well, you got to sterilize your tools somehow.
Yeah, they can go buy a candle. They can figure it out. But yeah, it's
a complete kit.
It's just add water. There it is, complete kit. It's all the things you need. Yes. All right. So so you did that. That didn't work, but I'm imagining that was the inciting incident to really kind of get you into the space then.
Yeah, there was a lot of books that started coming out. That Stamets book. Yeah, psilocybin mushrooms of the world. That came out in 96. And I bought it immediately. And I'm looking at it, and it talks about the azuricins that's in Astoria. And that's not too far from me. I mean, I can make that drive in a day there and back. And so that fall, my wife and I went, I was newly married at the time, drove up there just for that purpose. And she found some. The area was just like trampled. You could tell people were just hitting that hard. And I'm not sure if it was from the book or it was locally well known. But she did find one. And from that small sample, I got a little bit of spores, and I was able to clone because of my previous experience with the Homestead kit. And then the shroomery was in full blast, and everybody was like trying to get these mushroom spores. And I go, well, that's my goal, is I'm going to grow azures and sell them. And that next fall, I got a patch going somehow. I don't seem to be as successful now as I was then, but man, it really worked out well. I got a ton of them. And that's when and then in 1998, that's when I first put up a web store. it was just cash only, I think. Cash and checks.
I mean, but that's pretty pioneering. I mean, there's still a lot of people now who vend but don't want to put up a website.
Such an interesting concept to me.
It was like the shroomery was like driving me, because there was some other guy on there that said he had Azures and he was selling them like crazy, and it was the B plus, and he was calling it, he called them Azures, and then he called them hybrids, and it was just driving me nuts. So I've got the real thing, I'm gonna show him.
I love it. So
that's like your motto. I've got the real thing, I'm going to show you.
Yeah.
but that's very character defining, John, because that's like the impetus is you trying to correct misinformation.
Oh my God, I was so involved in the shroomery, it was driving me nuts how much bad information there was on there.
I like that. That is very interesting that's what drove you into starting a website. I mean, sure, to make some bucks, but you're just sitting there going, this guy is he's screwing people over. He's not selling what he says he is. And that's a great way to get into doing something, is to try to solve a problem or right a wrong. I like that. That's cool. All right. So Robert, how about you? First mushroom memory into how you're hanging out with this guy, John, here.
I do not have the experience of growing up in an area rife with mushroom culture. So the southern United States is not the kind of place that you find chanterelles on the dinner table often. So unfortunately was not really, as Paul Stamets says, mycophobic and mycophilic cultures. Mine was pretty mycophobic until getting away from home, obviously, and being exposed to new things. And like most people, I think, who come to mushrooms in general, there's always this tends to be a theme where folks are just generally either naturalist or interested in sort of natural environment, or some aspect of that, right? So grew up hiking and camping, came to the University of Tennessee because it's close to the mountains, right? All of those things. And while in school, being working with the student budget, trying to figure out ways how to manage a cannabis budget that goes beyond what you can sell plasma for, and at the time having roommates that were not interested in the idea of growing cannabis in our 2-bedroom apartment. So we realized that we in fact knew people who had successfully worked with mushrooms and grown them, and then obviously traded those mushrooms for their weed. And we were like, this is a great idea. This is how we win at barter economy. We just grow some mushrooms and we trade them for the weed that we want anyway, right? So that was, my introduction to Professor Fanaticus's tech. I had a friend who had successfully done this, and because I was like, well, that guy could do it, I think we can do it, right? Kind of moment. and followed the guide, ordered the spores, and did the thing, and was exposed to it through that. Of course, because of that, obviously was able to experience the mushroom experience for the first time as a college student, and had what I think most people would call those life-changing moments where your focus and the just things come into focus for you, I guess, or for me in a way. And did I at the time think that this would be what I was doing 20 something years later? Not at all, but it certainly allowed for some economic flexibility as a side hustle at the time. And two, because of getting interested in this, sort of side hobby to learn, I had exposure to the shroomery, right? At the time, this was pre everything other than like Usenets and whatever, right? We're just talking about web communities that were based around mushroom, around forums, like community forums. The shroomery still exists in very much the same, very similar form to it did back in the day, right? But that's where all the conversation was. That's where people talked about stuff. People asked questions. Folks, there was just this whole great community to solicit for ideas and whatever. And at the time, like John mentioned, there were a handful of folks who were harvesting spores, trading spores, whatever. There was a culture of that. And I figured, I'm growing clean mushrooms. I can take spore prints. I can put up a little website. This is the same kind of thing, back when PayPal was a thing, right? You could add a PayPal button to a website and you could get paid money. So this was all like very, very beginnings of what has developed into e-commerce these days, right? It's pre-Amazon and all that sort of stuff. We keep saying like we're going to be dinosaurs here before too long, but yeah, it was great because it was accessible in much the same way that a lot of this stuff has become accessible again with things like Cash App, Venmo, blah, 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 right? So, had that website set up within about 6 months to a year, and realized that I was able to, cash in the mail, get some extra spending money from week to week. I mean, it never paid much bills at the time, but it was interesting. And the website was called Shroom Depot, if anybody ever remembers that. But at the time, John and I started just, I guess as the kids would say, or what the generation ago, that we were vibing. And, there were vendors at the time that seemed to share a common interest in an idea of presenting material that was properly identified, trying to offer good customer service, reassuring customers and potential marketplace that this isn't just a scam filled, pool of people trying to take advantage of you. So that was very much where we synced up. And I think, from then the decision at some point we made was like, let's just combine our forces and figure out a way to kind of make this thing work a little bit better for both of us and provide a quality product and build a brand that people respect. And so that's kind of how at least I came to it. And I think my official involvement was probably sometime around 2000, 2001 or something like that, when we finally put things together. But at that point, Spore Works had been on the as a thing, and as the original website or whatever with its Astoria weather updates had been a thing since since
that's
1998. Right. So we sort of combined things and moved forward from there.
So you both actual cultivators, because these days you got people entering the space, well-moneyed people, or people with a bunch of rich friends who have invested in an effort, and they're really coming into the space with a whole lot of money and not a lot of knowledge, not a lot of experience. They're hearing what's going on. So and what I'm all about actual cultivators. So I love that you both are real cultivators. You were, the traditional college kids experiencing psychedelics for the first time, getting into it, loving it. But I'm hearing this thread of, wanting to make sure that you know what the hell you have, because all these spores look exactly the same unless you put them under a microscope. So that's cool. That commonality, you guys came together, two heads combined. I love it. And that you guys have been working together ever since. So let's do this. So now you guys are together. Talk me through the company. You guys have been around for a very long time. The marketplace these days, just when you're getting used to somebody, they disappear. People come and go. They're making money one week and then they don't like the money they're making next week, so they leave. But you guys have really been around for a very, very long time, decades and decades. So talk me through really the mission and how the mission has evolved. Like, where you started versus where you're at now, and what it's been like to stick around all these years.
I think the mission, like you mentioned, originally started with just being able to supply, like to be able to do the science, right? It was always a mission of ours to collect and present new and interesting data and information. So, its connection to psychedelic community was pretty much just by species alone, right? So it certainly drives a lot of this stuff that we do. But for example, even from the very beginning, if you were shopping Spore Works product, you didn't see a lot of language about how it made you feel when you grew this mushroom or anything like that, right? Whereas a lot of other vendors would talk very explicitly about effects or whatever, things like that. So there was always sort of a differentiation there as far as our mission, staying focused on proper taxonomy and collection of geographic representation of different mushroom species and land races and stuff like that, collection of genetics, and then ultimately, as the company evolved, the playing around and creation of some new things as well, bringing some new stuff to market. But yeah, at the time, it was very much just a pursuit of those principles, really. And then, of course, things evolve. And when you realize that you can provide for yourself or your family if that's growing. And then if it essentially employees, as things grow, it becomes very much just trying to do good business is really what our philosophy has always been, regardless of how or what space we're in, right? We wanted to always be a conscious company and be upfront and honest with our customers and all that sort of stuff. But not to get stuck on that too much. The evolution of everything really came to just us trying to navigate the I guess we would call it, John, just the marketplace as for safety and legal reasons, right? Things have changed dramatically in the last 5 years, but in our history, we were exposed and had to pivot towards changes in how folks reacted to this stuff becoming more well-known, right? So at the time, John mentioned PF Tech, and that's something that I talked about. Well, yeah, I mean, the Professor Fanaticus had a great business going until he was raided by a multi-agency coalition that shut him down for basically selling the instructions to grow mushrooms and the spores to do it, right? So when that happened, I mean, there was chaos in the marketplace as it was at the time, and people had to figure out what that meant for what they were doing, and at the time there were a lot of people who were in a similar situation in the vendor space that, okay, we're growing mushrooms, we're selling spores, we're telling you how to do that, we're also selling you substrate, like, right? It was very much not very different from how it's becoming now in some ways, but at the time, with the way things were structured and the legalities that were in place, the folks in power were not happy with that, and so they set a precedent, and from that precedent, all of the nature of the community changed, right? Or at least I wouldn't say the nature of the community. I have to separate vendors from the community. Community is wonderful. People that make money off of it, something entirely different. And although we rank among them, you know what I'm saying? I don't like say like it's exclusive club or anything like that, right? But to the vendors at the time had to pivot, right? We could no longer. We had to show something, and what we decided, okay, well, we're not going to sell these things for you to cultivate. That's clearly illegal. That's what got PF in trouble. But we can sell them for you to view under the microscope, which was, coining a term in science for microscopy use. Well, we could say this is for microscopy use only and restrict our exposure to your shenanigans should you choose to do something illegal.
So that's you guys.
Oh yeah, 100%. That did not, I mean, and people feel free to go back on your Wayback Machines because the spores for microscopy use only did not really exist until we pivoted post PF.
Man, if only you guys could have used Zen Lawyer back then.
Right.
You could have gotten the trademark on that. Man.
No, it's interesting because I think we've touched on this a little bit too, the idea that imitation's the highest form of flattery, and we have been flattered dramatically over the years. And that not just, I mean, it's in some cases, phrases become so ubiquitous that you don't even know where they come from. I mean, Kleenex, Frisbee, whatever, you can't trademark stuff like that. But spores for microscopy allowed all of the vendors to say, this is what we do. We went so far as to even provide, and still do, the whole notion of a microscopy kit, right? Where you would receive instructions on how to view it, a microscope slide, a cover slip, things like that. So that was very much important to us. The safety element of it is like, how do we do this? How do we continue to distribute this material and stay as safe as possible as not only as a company, but so that we can extend that level of safety to our customers? Because, you're sending us money, you're trusting us with your information. Like we 100% are deeply grateful for your trust in us to do that. We do not want to risk your involvement with whatever you purchase from us. So we're going to do it in the most legal and sort of clear-minded way we possibly can, based on the information that we have available to us. And at the time, that's what they were telling us. They were like, you can sell these spores, you just can't tell people how to grow them, which is still very much true, right? In a lot of cases, it's just that things have changed, obviously, for people in different localities, so they can take advantage of those things. But we certainly can't. I mean, we're still going to maintain a operational mentality that allows us to access all the customers in this country if we can. Outside of the states where we're restricted or whatever. But to your point about the flattery, even the disclaimer that we wrote about spores and material being shipped to Georgia, California, and Idaho, the number of websites, other vendors that literally lifted that disclaimer word for word from our website, it's ubiquitous now. I guarantee you there's even major competition that you could go to and say, yeah, that's pretty much what Spore Works says. It's like, I wrote that. You know what I mean? That wasn't a lawyer that we lifted from some sort of like rocket lawyer thing. Like, I wrote that, and it's just interesting to see that show up in so many places. But
That's the flex for You guys got to get the T-shirt that just says for microscopy purposes.
100%. I mean,
it would be a cool shirt.
I'm on board.
No, that's so cool hearing that too, because I'm sitting here thinking, right? You both are the kind of guys that want to make sure if you say you're selling something, it is what it is. You're sitting there looking through a microscope going, well, all I'm doing, this is okay, right? That's what we got to say.
Well, you had to bridge the gap between a spore syringe to microscopy, because before PF, a spore syringe did not exist. He's the one that came up with that. And you do use water or some other medium like KOH to suspend the spores in, and then you can put them on the slide. So now the syringe is a spore dispenser for microscopy use. I mean, it seemed obvious to me. It's more obvious if it's a spore print.
Well, we thank you. How many at this point? I mean, man, there could be close to 1 million people growing magic mushrooms in the country. So thank you on behalf of all those people.
Well, and to be, like John mentioned, the whole concept of things like spore syringes, that was Fanaticus. I mean, he pioneered that. He pioneered the whole idea of, like you said, the mixing of the substrate that he had sort of developed so that it could be sterilized in a more egalitarian way, not requiring a pressure cooker. So that was revolutionary. I mean, people look past that a little bit these days because they're you know, every citizen scientist has a second bedroom with a laminar flow hood and a culture fridge. But at the time, I mean, this was very groundbreaking. And the spore syringes, for what it's worth, started to become a product that people wanted their spore material distributed to them in. Like, outside of folks that maybe still preferred to get spore prints, that was and still continues to be in some form or another the way that people want their material. Like, there's certainly been an evolution of late in other directions, but yeah, that kind of allowed that to continue. And I mean, at some point, I think even Spore Works pre-PF, we may have even had things like lab gear and like petri dishes and stuff like that on our website, but we like completely dislocated that stuff. Like, that was the moment that we decided that Spore Works was going to be a spore focused company, and we would also offer medicinal gourmet, like basically the basic mushroom cultures, right? Because people always still want that stuff, and in our lab we can maintain and evaluate that material as well. So that became the focus.
So why do you think? Because I mean, I love a spore print. So do you really think that the change to the syringe was just because that's what PF did, and so everybody went along with it? Or was there a logistical reason that became the way to go? Because, man, you sure get a hell of a lot more spores on a print.
Yeah, I mean, in my experience, like, just, you know, having offered the same type of product for, or seen the cultivation trends over a little bit of time to see what moves, like, yeah, I mean, 50-1, right? Spore syringes versus spore prints. I mean, it's still amazing, just the number, but people do still prefer them in a lot of different ways. Storage, shipping, all of those things. I mean, it's got its benefits, but at the time too, you know, it's important to remember that spore sourcing was an important question, right? And so the whole question and this certainly seems to be something that a lot of people look past or are willing to look past these days. But the whole chicken and egg argument with mushrooms, it's like, well, where'd you get the spores?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. Like, did it have more to do with the fact that if you get a print, like, you see the mushroom cap, like, it reminds you that there was a mushroom sitting on top of that piece of aluminum foil or paper or whatever. If you just get this, like, you're abstractifying it a little bit more. It's just like a solution. You barely see the spores, and so it's easier. Like, does it feel safer for people? Was there a tech going around where it made more? I'm just trying to understand that.
I honestly think that the spore syringe product initially was more nefarious, is a good word to put it, because you were now putting a syringe in the mail with a needle attached to it. You know what I mean? That's what we did at the time. Oh, at the time, 100%, right? I think because it was a different product too. I think BD had a different, it was a different mechanism. And it wasn't until at some point we decided that shipping them without the syringe needle was important. And that was also, I don't know that we were the first person to do that, but I want to say that that's now obviously the industry standard. And I don't know that we necessarily took that from somebody else's lead. I think at some point we just decided, maybe through council, maybe there were some other issues with shipping. Some of this stuff blurs together over the years, but there may have been some issue with like shipping sharps that way or something, right? So detaching the needle. But in our mind, it made it less, what's a good way of putting it? Visually and offensive. So if for example, somebody was opening the package who wasn't intended to open the package, and they didn't know what they were looking at, or the package busted open in transit, which is, something that happens. You didn't just have this this huge hypodermic needle, right? like because the people automatically go to drugs, right? And so that was part of it. I think the tech aspect of it was also a big thing. If I recall, most of the cultivation and sort of methodology stuff at the time really sort of supported hydrated, you're going to do this anyway, so why not go ahead and buy it this way, right? And also too, like at the time when I talk about that chicken and egg argument, you have to remember that the production of spores was like, you were essentially, that was your gold, right? You could then take your spores and then you could sell the print for X number of dollars, or you could take that print and multiply it out. I mean, this is the stuff that people deal with on the, every vendor who's ever done this has realized, oh, I could take this print and make 10 syringes and sell those, and they math. Right. So it's great. It makes sense. Right. And in many ways, you're going to make a profit. That's how business works. But the notion was that spores were, for what it's worth, what's a good way of putting it? A limited and valuable resource, right? The effort and expense that went into producing them required some method to provide a way to stretch them, or like, because we've never really diluted anything to a point where like a lot of people do, but we've always been pretty mindful of that. But just to be able to make that material more available to a wider audience or a wider customer base, that was a big part of it. And as we're talking about sort of the evolution of our company, a big thing that we've always taken seriously too, again, is the security aspect of that. Like it was always important for us when people ask that question, where do you get your spores, to be able to show them where those spores came from in a way that satisfied that answer. And initially in the early 2000s, as things really, I wouldn't say really started going, but as our business started to develop, we were working with partners in Jamaica. I mean, that's why there's this map on the back of my window. It's not just there because I love Jamaica. I haven't been in many years, but we actually were down there for a couple of years with partners working on mushroom farming operations. This is all very much, again, pre-psychedelic revolution, when now, there was nobody having a mushroom retreat down there. The Jamaicans would have like looked at us like, what the fuck are you guys talking about, eating mushrooms and going and staring at the cliffs, right? So, Mrs. Brown's tea house was around. That was about it. But we had we partnered up and started a small mushroom farming operation with the goal and intention of producing mushroom spore prints, right? And we did that for a number of years. And then ultimately found more stability with European suppliers. So we've worked with agents in Europe over the years, last decade or so, to develop to where we are today. But that was always important to us, to be able to say, like, look, these aren't just mushrooms that we're putting you at risk by doing things that are risky on our end to produce material that ultimately should be legal for you to own and for you to observe in this manner. It was a no-brainer for us, but it was always important. Part of our mission, you talk about what makes it kind of what Spore Works, but is to be able to say that. And now fast forward, now we have a facility outside of outside of Vienna in Austria, that's state of the art, man. This thing's fantastic, and it produces wonderful mushroom spore prints, and mushrooms and all sorts of other things. And we can do legal research there. We can do legal strain development, all that sort of stuff. But all of that was really important because, like, our safety, our customer safety is key. Many of us are have families, and we didn't want to be, doing anything on the outlaw side of things in the psychedelic space that would put that at risk, right? So heavy investment in making sure that we could continue to do things that way, right? Rather than just, hey, I'm going to wear a mask and show up and talk about stuff. It's like, no, I mean, it's this way because we know this to be safe and legal, right?
Well, I'm sitting here hearing all that, and I'm just like, and another way Professor Fanaticus contributing to the space, because what happened to him then was definitely an omen, and so you guys are sitting there go, we want to do this, but we don't want that to happen. So how do we do this?
I will say this is a bit of history that maybe most people don't remember. And this is the one thing I didn't know Robert McPherson. I never met him. He was an older gentleman. He was a jazz musician, a fairly talented one from what I understand, and played at local clubs in the area. So but when he got arrested and when he got released, he was sentenced to house arrest. The man got control of the fanaticus.com URL again from the feds, and he put up a picture of himself on his property, which was amazingly beautiful. He's staring at a lake. It's a picture of his foot with an ankle bracelet on it, basically giving like a 1-paragraph story about how this happened to him, and he's happy to live out his house arrest in this, like, basically a big fuck you to the whole process. So I was just like, you go, guy. Like, that was very classy. So, all due respect to him. I mean, changed the industry. And there are people along the way, I think, that have had a similar impact and influence on stuff. But if you've used a spore syringe, it's because of Robert McPherson, like 100%, right?
In the very, very, very early days of any technology or interest or community or activity or anything, there's the original innovator. Like if you look at skateboarding or snowboarding or mountain biking or whatever, and that the early years, there's just so much innovation happening because there's nothing. And so you're like, it's just all a bunch of people trying to solve problems and figure stuff out. But then now we're so removed from it that it's really easy to forget the role that these people had, and how things you take for granted and you do all the time are because some guy was trying to figure out how to do all this stuff.
I mean, revolutionized. I mean, if anything, made access to, what people rightly call medicine, life-changing experiences, whatever it is, it very much, all due respect, it's sort of like, we're amazed at what it's provided for us along these years. I mean, even though the sports syringe thing wasn't really a focus when we started, it's obviously a big part of what we do now. And to be able, I mean, like we have always carried his legacy strain. The PF standard classic strain has been part of our inventory and will in some form, whether or not it's as a syringe or a spore print, so for as long as we can manage to keep it going. So as long as they let us, we'll keep keeping it.
So you guys are just, the history is super cool. It's really interesting to hear how people operated pre-internet. I love the pre-Al Gore era.
Well, you had made a mention earlier too about the notion of starting a website, right? And how that's still kind of a novel idea. And that's interesting how full circle it is to me, because that's to be like presenting a brand through a website was the way you did it. Like that's how e-commerce developed, but the way the marketplace has changed, and there's a lot more personal interaction now. Like that's something that it's for what it's worth, the fact that we are both here talking to you is a testament to how our philosophy has changed as far as privacy and access goes. This is the first time we've both done this, right? I know John's been interviewed by other people, but for us to talk about our company and present ourselves this way is very unique. But what we understand is that for the last 5 years, folks have been doing this, right? Like people have very much been creating networks and connections in this community. And for what it's worth, because of our safety concerns and because of our privacy issues, we've certainly maintained a position on the sidelines and sort of observed from, I wouldn't say necessarily afar, but sort of adjacent, right? Like we've just not been part of that conversation. And having an opportunity to come and talk to you today too, is this a great way to remind folks that like, not that we're just still here necessarily, but that like, what's been happening is great. And I want to, it's awesome for us to be able to celebrate, life-changing events in the last, 5 years to 10 years for many people. The fact that folks aren't going to jail for producing and distributing medicine, or that people are being able to do a little bit more science on the up and up as far as being able to share and exchange information and data. And we're certainly more approachable on all the topics as well when it comes to that sort of stuff. I mean, you knew things changed when Paul Stamets started showing up at conferences saying the word psilocybin again, because there was a moment. I mean, I don't even say a moment. There was probably a solid 15-year period where, like, you know, if at Telluride Mushroom Festival, if you said the word psilocybin around Paul, he'd just fucking turn around and walk away, right? So it's just like, that should prove to you where we are in essence, right?
Yeah, even in scientific academic settings, I got a buddy that comes on the show a lot. He got his PhD in Lentinus, and when he was trying to figure out what to do his PhD in, of course, he's growing magic mushrooms in his dorm room or wherever he's living. He would have loved to do that, but he said, I could, if I had even just said, well, what about psilocybe? He's like, I mean, I might have gotten kicked out. He's like, no one talked about it. And he said he would go to these conferences and, of course, no one would say anything. Maybe one random dude would like lightly touch on it, and the people would get quiet. They'd walk away from them. But then, of course, later in somebody's hotel room, they're smoking a joint or something, and then all the truth comes out. So it's been this like untouchable topic in those circles for so long, and to see now PhD level professors at major universities doing research projects, getting licenses to do that. I mean, it's radical change.
Two stories real quick for you on this, if you don't mind. So the first one is that, yeah, I mean, in a year where we were solicited by a research associate who essentially took psilocybe spores to the International Space Station, our spores. We provided him the spores for this material. I don't want to, there's not much hubris in that, like but we provided the spores for this project. That was amazing, to be able to have a launch party and see a rocket take the mushroom spores that we collected in Austria, shipped to the United States legally, prepared for this research associate to go on the International Space Station to do some kind of, and John can clarify this, but the research project had to do with like nanostructures or something like crazy. I don't understand it at all.
I don't either. We don't have the paper that's going to be written yet that should clarify it. And I thought he was going to do a presentation that was going to be streamed. I don't know if there was technical issues or it just wasn't streamed. But yeah, I'm still waiting for some follow up on that, because yeah, I did not understand.
That's crazy to me. I mean, it shows you exactly
what's going on.
So if I go to your website and under your shipping section, does it say we ship many
to the International Space,
including the International Space Station?
Yeah. No, unfortunately,
we should put that there.
You should. That's hilarious. And then the link to the man, you got to do that. I'm just sitting there thinking, I can't tell you how many psychonauts have told me that they're convinced the spores are from outer space, and I'm sitting here going, "Oh, you brought them back home. That's so nice."
Yeah.
But yeah, the other part of that is not a super related story, but talks to the change that's taken place. And I guess the statute of limitations has run out on this, so this is a fun story to share. We were at the Telluride Mushroom Festival one year, and there may have been some Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms that were there at the same time that we were there. And, they go out and they do these forages with the guides every morning. And then everybody brings back your mushrooms for the collection tables, and they get identified by the experts at the collection table under the tent, just like every mushroom festival or whatever, right? This was a particularly bad year for weather. Like, it was just dry. There weren't mushrooms out there. So the pickings on the collection table were really light. Well, at some point, somebody may have snuck this cluster of Psilocybe Somebody, I don't know who did this, but they put this cluster of Psilocybe cubensis mushrooms on a plate on the ID table. And it just confounded people, right? Because mycologists don't, like, John got a kick out of this. It doesn't compute, should not exist here, doesn't compute, right? What is this? And at some point, they're all like, we're watching this, right? Because we saw this interesting thing happening. And so these people are all crowded around the specimen trying to figure out what it is. And they take it over to Paul, and he just kind of looks at it, and he picks a piece of straw off the bottom of it, and he looks at it, and he's like, that's because somebody picked this out of their garden, and they're kind of playing a prank on you guys. And everybody's like, oh. And then that cluster of mushrooms went, whoop. And we were just like, all right, guys. And so it was funny. I think at some point it happened again, and somebody actually wrote the identification on the plate later and kind of like to see how long it would sit out there. But that was like, this just shows you how silly and clandestine and sort of like weird people were about stuff back then. Whereas now people would just be like, oh, okay, whatever. You know what I mean? Like, you need some mushrooms? I mean, whatever. Like, it's just ubiquitous, right? So it's kind of interesting.
I love that. You hearing that story, I'm just like, oh my God, I have a spin-off channel idea now. I'm going to just send people to different mushroom festivals with non-native species and just watch and then film the reaction of all
blow minds. I mean, because like John got a kick out of it. He's just like, because the scientists.
Yeah, they think a certain way. It has to have been picked locally if it's on the table. That's the assumption. It had to have been picked locally. I mean, it's fresh and it's right there. And I did the same thing to the Mount Pisgah. They have a mushroom show, but I just handed it to him. I go, hey, what's this? And it was Elenii before it had been described. Because I was legitimately curious. I go, what the hell is this? And they were really going over that with everybody's getting called in, and they couldn't figure it out. But those disappeared too. They always disappear. Somebody takes them home.
Well, times have changed.
Mhm.
I can tell you a quick anecdote from this year's NAMA. One of the ID people in the whole ID group, I thought I found Psilocybe polliculosa. We brought the mushroom in. It was some random mycena. And the guy happily, without any hesitation, gave me some GPS coordinates. He goes, go wander around this place, and you might get lucky. So things are different. You can definitely talk about psilocybe now at these events. And I mean, I'm just going to say it's because of this underground community. It's because of efforts like you guys who, Robert, you keep talking about, like we're sort of on the sidelines. We're here, we're paying attention, but for the purpose of longevity and all that, we're creating a little distance. And I'm sitting here thinking, but you're providing an utterly crucial service to the community. And so that's like a sacrifice. I already know you guys. Like I know you'd love to be knee deep in some of the stuff, but to keep doing what you're doing and providing that service, it's like a priest. He'd love to go have sex with somebody, but he can. He's doing a service. This is right. This is the role you guys have chosen, and so I commend you for that. I'm sure there's all sorts of people watching the show who appreciate that, have sourced genetics from you guys, or new cultivators who maybe because they're so new don't even know who you guys are, and now they know that bit of history, why you guys are doing what you do. And yeah, so I think that's really cool. We've talked a little bit about doing your own work. I think Robert's also talked a little bit about this with me. Knowing what you know about the community now, because I mean, back in the day, you kind of had to do your own work. I don't think people were selling plate cultures. People weren't doing a lot of this stuff because of, Professor Fanaticus, and you guys were so close to some of these big events that had happened. But now there are, as far as the eye can see, culture vultures who do not grow mushrooms, do not do the work, are not cultivators. They just buy petri dishes. They source plate cultures from people that they trick into, sending stuff to them, or they buy it from people, and they just expand and distribute and all that. Both of you guys talk to me about how you see the market right now, as far as doing your own work, what's happening because people aren't doing their own work, and then how that philosophy has informed what you guys do over the years as far as you guys doing your own work.
Yeah, the liquid culture thing is, it's taken over. It's so easy. I mean, you can buy a liquid culture from some other vendor, assume it's good, squirt it into a jar of malt water, and now you've got 100 more, and you can sell those, and then you can do it again and again and again. You never have to see a mushroom, but you have to make a ton of assumptions. You got to assume that you got it clean from somebody and it's identified correctly if you don't grow it out. And contaminations can creep in and they can go unnoticed. There can be mycelium, mold mycelium, or imperfect mushroom mycelium that it won't fruit because it's the wrong species. And this isn't just a problem that you see with, you know, culture vultures. Even legitimate culture banks, government culture banks, there's a few papers that went through, I think, all the cubensis or no, it was all the psilocybes, psilocybes. And there's a percentage of them that aren't even mushrooms. There's some other contaminant.
We were just talking about that last night on the show. Yeah, where you think you stored something properly, and then 5 years later somebody goes to use it for a paper, and they're like, "Oh, cool, this is just mold."
Yep, that happens. It's not rare, and I don't know if it's because of the propagation techniques or the storage techniques or just the initial issue. It can be hard to tell. DNA helps with that a lot. We had an incident where it was an active species of Pluteus, and Pluteus spores are notoriously difficult to germinate. And we had one of our guys, and he said, "Oh yeah, it germinated immediately. It was like quick." And I go, I don't know. That sounds good, but also suspect. And never did get it to fruit. Finally did a DNA run on it, and it was not Pluteus. It was some sort of other mycelium.
Is that part of standard practice for you guys, where you're sequencing, you're barcoding your stuff to make sure it is what you think it is?
Yeah, we're doing that in-house a fair amount. It helps with questionable species, but also you can find new species that way. But you didn't, you thought it was something else, and it's actually this, but no one else even knows that. It's amazing. I love that. And I want to get enough examples of every section so we can make our own phylogenetic tree that's just our material.
Yeah.
And I would
Man, now you're speaking my language. I mean, me and Ed, we talk all the time about, man, if only we had 100 grand, we could figure this out. We were talking about restriction enzymes and how if we started getting the right ones, we could go back and eventually building them enough of a data set. We could tell you what B plus actually is. We could tell you where Golden Teacher came from. We could start figuring out some of these populations and some of the paternity, maternity, to use a, I guess, inappropriate term for fungus, but we can figure that out.
Yeah, there's a paper that's partially did that, where they looked and they could see clusters within strains, like these are associated, but it gets muddy. It's a pretty big paper. I'll send you the link. They compared them with Australian wild collections.
Oh, the Alistair McTaggart paper. Yeah, I know that, but that didn't quite answer some of the questions I wanted.
Right.
But
it's
yes,
not
right.
fine enough detail.
Yeah, it does give
but it gives you some hints.
Clusters. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. I would love more, more fidelity around this, like what really is Melmac strains? What, and the science is there. Someone just has to spend a little bit of money and time and effort and do it. But we could really get some clarity and not just then have like an ambiguous cluster of 50 strains, but we could actually start figuring out more stuff and go back and go, this is from here, this is from there. If we start crossing Thai cubes with Mexican cubes, this is what happens. And the alkaloid profile looks like this, that, and the other thing. All things I would do if I win, the Mega Million lottery tomorrow.
And identifying which ones are just the same too, right? Because there's just the whole notion of like how much of this is just rebranded or renamed genetics. And
yeah,
I think you asked a question too, to the point of like what makes our priority list and what it is that we focus on and things like that. And for us, it's always been, for one thing, we've always wanted to have a sort of top-down approach to representing anything that was psilocybin related. So even, not just the psilocybe species like Psilocybe cubensis, azuris, and all those, or the Paniolus, but also the related like Gymnopolis or anything that possess these interesting and unique alkaloids, right, that shared as a common characteristic. So, of course, for us, that's always been a concentration on a diversity of species. And that was how we wanted to differentiate our catalog from everybody else's, was to say that we're going to try to focus on, interest, like all of it, like, not for one reason or another, like even some of the inactives, right? So, we'll have those varieties available, say as spore prints or whatnot, because quite frankly, in some of these cases, you get a collection of 20 spore prints. That's probably all you're going to sell in a year or two for some of these varieties. But just in all fairness, because, the bulk of it is obviously with the cubensis catalog. And like you mentioned, being able to identify things or properly identify things, pull new species out that you weren't aware of because of some minor genetic difference. Like DNA sequencing is, as John mentioned, something that we do in-house on a level that allows us to at least eliminate those potentials, right? So we're not misrepresenting something. And like, for example, like when natalensis came to us with the original samples that we had, now the okra, I see us centrata, thank you. We knew it wasn't natalensis, right, pretty early on. And we were able to say, no, this does not match the genetic profile that's been published for this species. So that was a good, that was a way that we were able to present that material as such to people. And then too, like the concentration on what we offer with our cubensis genetics, like being able to represent geographic diversity, like, has always been important to us. Not just like I mentioned, the Pokemon mentality earlier, but because there's a lot of different collections from around the world. Some of them are going to carry interesting genetics. They're going to carry certain traits that we want to look at or preserve, or like you said, eventually move into an area of hybridization for people who are able to do that. And yeah, that's sort of the focus, right? Is to be able to know more about that stuff and to have more information. And not, and I understand that we sort of have been the stewards in some ways of some of this strain lineage because of how long we've carried some of this stuff, but a lot of the stuff just shows up, right? And people are like, it's this and this, and we went and shook it up, and now you got this, and you're like, did you though? I don't know. So, kind of figuring that stuff out is always, it's been part of our mission statement.
And that's your brand, right? Because the counterpoint to that is there are people who are obsessed with proving or disproving somebody crossed something, and at the end of the day, I'm always going, well, is it cool? So does it matter? Is it an isolation of a strain, or is it a new strain? And it doesn't necessarily matter, but for what you guys are doing, because you know who you are and what you're trying to do, right? That's not really a piece of the pie that you're a part of. You're just going, you guys can keep playing that game. We're selling stuff. We know what it is, where it came from. And we have a logic to why we're making it available for people. That's a lesson for anybody that is doing this, is know what you're doing.
And like you mentioned earlier, just doing your own work, right? Just being able to come to this with a clear knowledge of what it is you're working with and present it as such. I mean, obviously we've been I wouldn't say victim, very little victimization, but people have taken material that we've produced and certainly commercialized it in whatever form they possibly can. It is what it is, right? I mean, I think we've always approached it from the standpoint of like, we're not going to do that to anybody else. I mean, it's sort of golden rule mentality for us as far as just like existing in a doing good business, like I said, for what it's worth. But still, there are these strain lines and there are these races that are sort of ubiquitous and have been on the market for a long time. Developing interesting things from them is certainly a proposition that is a little bit more obtainable to us. Some of the changes that we've made in our structure and the investments that we've made to expand our ability to legally investigate and develop these strains and species is really just now starting to come back online. So I think we got a little bit of catch up to do, I think, and it's hard for me to admit that, having occupied the position we have for so long, but But that comes from us also carefully navigating the legal environment that we've been presented. Like I mentioned, we don't live in, we're not based in Denver, Colorado. We're not based in, Washington, D.C. or wherever else where it's basically carte blanche to do these investigations and present material with some level of legal cover because of your local regulations and whatnot. Some level. We just don't know yet. We don't know yet. And like you mentioned about the state of the marketplace, that is not a question that we're willing to be the ones to solve, right? So I understand that there are other people out there that have a risk tolerance that they're willing to accept when working in this industry. That's fine. We've all been assaulted by Instagram drug dealer plugs. I mean, it's crazy what's happened over the last year or two in that regard. But for us to be able to do what we do, kind of have to go through these channels. And yeah, you're right. These culture vultures, or as you call them, like I see my Instagram feed is nothing but some of the world's best cultivators and producers and whatever. Wonderful folks doing amazing things. I love looking through my Instagram feed on Spore Works because it's just we follow all these great people. But they're doing that. You know what I mean? Like we're not, that has to come out of our lab in Austria, and it's a process. And for us to be able to navigate that, to bring that to the public, a little bit bigger ship to steer, but it's certainly a priority of ours moving forward to sort of also provide new and interesting things when it comes to genetics, but not, like I said, keeping very, very close attention to the idea of doing our own work, developing these things from collections that have been submitted to us, or native collections that we've secured through partnerships with other collectors, all of this stuff done in a collaborative method, understanding. And then we'll do it, and somebody will take it and make a culture out of it and sell it and make a lot of money. It's just the nature of the beast. And my karma's fine. I hope their karma's fine too. You know what I mean? That's all I could, do a little bit of loving kindness intentions for them and say, hey man, you do you, we're going to do us. And hopefully things will work out.
You just made me think of something. So I got a question for you. So a decentralized growing situation, and if you don't want to answer this question, you don't have to, but I'm curious, have you guys created an internal expiration date for swabs? So is there a date where you go, all right, we happen to have had this bit, like at the grocery store, right? Like, all right, the celery's been here for 3 weeks. We got to get rid of the celery. Do you do that? Are you moving enough volume? It's not an issue. Have you ever had to address that concern?
Sure. So a couple things I think there, and John can kind of fill in on his experience with this. So number one, we don't currently do swabs. We're about to start offering some swabs. I think that's an interesting delivery method, and so we're going to experiment with it and see how that goes. Our approach has always been that dried spora is pretty much as stable as you're going to get for as long as you need it. And I'm sure that I can go find a spore print that's 10 years old in my office somewhere. But at the same time, I'm pretty sure that if I wanted to investigate that spore print, I'd have some success in investigating it. So we've never really put an internal expiration date, I think, on spora in that form. I will say very clearly that we are not selling 10-year-old spore prints. Anytime that we've had that material age to that point, we're not passing that along to our customer base. And certainly having material come from Austria at this point, everything you receive is super, super, super fresh from us. It has been, for some time. But I think with spore syringes, it's a little different. Obviously, once you hydrate the spora, there is a clear expiration, and we do not encourage people to look at something that's older than, say, 3 or 4 months in that regard. It just, even though it very well probably is still super stable after that, it's just one of those things that's like, man, don't look at this 11 months from now and then come at me if you have difficulty. It's really where we come from. And like you had mentioned earlier, I think that disconnect that exists as a provider and vendor in this space, even though we're members of the community, how we have to approach it is a little bit different. And that disconnect is, in fact, a sacrifice. Like people talk about the nature of interactions with us. And one of the biggest challenges that we've faced really is with the ubiquitous nature of mushrooms in this marketplace and the world in general, is that people think that I mean, there's Netflix specials and there's all this other stuff. So why can't I just call this company that has a phone number and start asking them about how to grow magic mushrooms? You just can't. You know what I mean? And it's not, unfortunately, on some level, it became our job to educate the customer about that. And we've had to find ways to do that tactfully and mindfully so that we can continue to have interactions with them. But
well, now it's easy, Robert. You just tell them to watch the MycoGeeky Podcast. You just tell them to hit up YouTube, and you don't. I mean, you're not going to get in trouble for telling them that.
But that just highlights kind of the difference and the disconnect. Like, right, or a customer, for example, ordering something from us, having a problem with it and just not knowing how to address that properly. Like, you can't call us and talk about how you tried to grow this out when we sell it for microscopy use. I mean, just tell us you had difficulty viewing it under the microscope. That's why we sold it to you. That offers an ability for us to replace it as per our policy. We're good. 100% want you to be whole. But the minute you start talking about shenanigans, I mean, like, you're putting us in a position where we can't. Now, I don't know how that is for other people in the mushroom space or other vendors that you talk to. I would also venture to say that almost all of them do not have a phone number that you can call. You call the Spore Works phone number, a delightful person will answer the phone and talk to you.
I met many vendor friends, and many have voiced that concern as well about answering those questions. Now, you want to know who can answer those questions with less concern is the guy selling the adjacent supplies, right? Well, I sell grain bags, so I can talk about cultivating mushrooms. We don't have to talk about the species necessarily, but
exactly. And that certainly allowed a layer of disconnect. I mean, it's everybody sort of figured it out. I think for the most part, what's happened in what I've observed here in the last couple of years is that the risk tolerances continued to be pushed. And so now we're finding, and this is no judgment. Please understand that I'm not judging anybody else's operational procedures or what they were willing to do. I mean, more power to you if you're finding success and peace in it. But the idea of selling mushroom culture and substrate, I mean, that put somebody in jail not too long ago. And I don't know that the laws that put that person in jail have changed necessarily. Now, the laws where you live and Colorado Springs or wherever might be a little different, but the minute you ship that ensemble of goods to Timmy in Des Moines, Iowa, and Timmy's mom intercepts that package, you've got problems on your hand because you're not, you know what I mean? Like, figure it out, guys. That's kind of where we are with it as far as observational mode where, I don't want to say we trailblazed a certain methodology for this, but if you want to look to a model for safety and security, I think we set the standard there. And of course, other people are going to be pretty risky with how they want to approach the marketplace. And it is all for profit. Like when it comes to that stuff, it is 100% for profit. And I'm not saying we certainly aren't interested in losing money, but the mindfulness is not there in the approach to how the product's being delivered or the, collaborations that could exist otherwise to make it a little bit more, I don't know. I don't want to use words like acceptable because it's all acceptable. It's just to be able to play the game, right?
Well, so all that I'm sitting here thinking. Now, also these guys, again, to go back to Professor Fanaticus, right? He came to an end, right? That legacy, you watched it come to an end because of legal outcomes, and so. To me, it's very smart to go, well, we don't want this to come to an end, not just for obvious business reasons, but also from the service you are providing on top of the obvious service you're providing to make sure that this agenda of spreading the spores occurs, right? Like you're here still. Who else is? You guys are like the Snoop Dogg of spore vendors, right? Like you've been around a long time.
Sure. I think that, that longevity is obviously there for that like safety and security element, because I think the important thing for people to understand is that like, we're obviously wanting to do this because like you said, this space, this business has been very good to us and the people that have been associated with us. We're very, very grateful for that, right? We want to keep that going for the people who are involved. And the mission, like you said, has always been to spread the spores, identify them, taxonomy, you have correct taxonomy, all of that is part of it. But to the point of like acceptable risk and what that puts people in front of when it comes to this other stuff, it's just kind of like, what are you willing to do there? So, this is what we're willing to do. And mindfully so, right? Like, I think that's the important part of it.
A lot of dads in the world. Some of them skydive, some of them don't. Some of them race cars, right? Some of them are Formula One drivers, and then dad dies, and he's gone, and now kids don't have a dad, right? So you guys, your position is a position of safety, both for yourself, but really also for the community. Of we're gonna be here.
Well, yeah, and I think the point that I guess I got lost in thought there, but the point of this was to say that there are consequences for misstepping. So, for example, using McPherson as an example, the consequences of his actions were that the industry had to change because there was a reaction to what he was doing, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the reaction to that homestead kit being sent to somebody in California that just made a legislature mad, and like they came up with legislation to regulate that. There is almost certainly some level, we have experienced a psychedelic renaissance in the last 5 years, specifically 10, maybe more, whatever. There are some people who are not receptive to this. You understand that. Like, it is all awesome that we're all like on the same page when it comes to this, and kind of goes to the point that somebody made at some point talking about this revolution. Like, we're the status quo now. You know what I mean? The people who have clandestinely talked about psychedelics, or the people who have like, whispered in each other's ears about the benefits of this sort of stuff, like, we're pretty much the status quo. So that's why it's ubiquitous, why, people in the soccer pickup line are talking about microdoses or whatever, right? So like that becomes the standard for the community. But when it comes to like what's actually like the laws and legal framework we have to work under, it really hasn't caught up, in many ways. And so actions that these companies take might have consequences. Like, you draw attention to some particular part of the process, or poke the bear, as it were, in the wrong way, and you get a reaction, right? And we know that even though it seems like people aren't necessarily paying attention to what is happening very specifically in some of these spaces, we know that there's an awareness. I mean, the DEA letter in early 2024 highlighted the fact that there were people asking questions about things like the difference in legality between spores and mushroom culture, right? So this is not ancient history or old conversations. These are all very much part of what is going on in the community from the standpoint of being able to distribute material, right? The community is doing all sorts of awesome things when it comes to therapy and medicine and connection, and like, you know what I mean? Like, that's all separate from the people up here trying to make money selling spores, or the people over here trying to sell substrate, or the folks, putting research chemicals in mushroom chocolates and selling them at the head shops. I mean, it's all beyond that, right? But when it comes to what these people are doing, yeah, there's gonna be a reaction. You can't be putting, RC derivatives for psilocybin in mushroom chocolates and selling them, without. When does that stop? I mean, if you're enjoying that, please, it's awesome. Good, more power to you. But come on, guys. You know what I mean? It's like those old like 80s or 90s commercials. Like, come on, man. It's like, what are you doing here? Like, this is going to poke the bear. And I imagine that we will have clarity in the coming future. I don't know when or who's going to bring that clarity, but it will come in the form of, my kid bought this chocolate bar from a friend who bought it at the head shop, and they ran out in the street and got what, what I mean? Just what, insert horrific story here, right? The world has been exposed to this stuff before. So, we just want to try and be as mindful to that as possible, and not create a situation where our influence could potentially change things for other people, right? Because of that.
Okay, so the DEA statement. What overall, I would say everybody in the community was kind of like, "Oh, this is great, cool. This is like a outright, overt, crystal clear statement," and they celebrated. there were a handful of people who were hopping in my DMs going, "What do you think about this?" And I go, "I don't know why out of the blue the statement was made." I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what you think drove that, where the impetus lies, and then once that statement was made, did anything operationally change for you guys? Did any philosophy change?
Um, I think specifically, my understanding was that that letter was the direct. It was a response to a solicitation by a law firm or a group of lawyers that I believe was and this is hearsay, but I believe it was on the representation of maybe like a group that owned tobacco stores or cannabis stores, vape store, whatever you want to call it, head shops. We have 100 different names for these places, right? So I think it was done on a solicitation from them to get clarification on that particular subject so that potentially they might be able to sell the product. Like maybe their insurance had questions about it or their bank had questions about it and they needed legal clarity, because on some level of business operation, I mean, you have to understand most of what's happening in the mycosphere and mycospace is being done very much by small businesses or people that are not heavily funded or have to go through the standard channels that most big businesses go with lending or what, you know what I mean? So there's a lot of barriers that are removed to entry when it comes to that stuff. But for people who are, I want to say, operating on a larger scale, but for folks who have things like brick and mortar stores or have, you know what I mean, that kind of stuff, there's other encumbrances that come along with that, you know, insurances and like other stuff that you have to get legal clarification for. And I think that's what they were looking for there. And I don't know if they got what they were looking for, as far as, you know, were they looking for a statement to sort of affirm the legality of liquid culture, or were they more specifically looking to affirm the legality of spore material? I don't know. For us, what it meant is it gave a clear definition that what we do is in fact okay. So, you know, and the way that we sell our material is in fact okay. And what that led to ultimately was the opening of banks to allow for people who were wanting to operate on the level of whatever framework that they had in place could start doing things like payment processing. So that's, you know, if people are familiar with Spore Works, they know that for a good chunk of time, a big part of the way we would process an order for you was by taking your order by phone. Because we just didn't have the ability to process credit card payments through our website. And that was a problem that most vendors in the space shared for a good period of time. It was probably the biggest barrier to entry in this business was how do you get paid? And it's been the same way in cannabis industry and things like that, but people just line up at the door with pockets full of cash. So like they don't do that at sporeworks.com or whatever else, right? Like it has to come through the mail or the internet or somehow. But for us, I think that letter clarified, for the banks anyway, the ability to start operating with companies like ours on a, like, I want to be clear about this, with full knowledge of what's happening. There's no subterfuge. There's no, oh, but we sell a ginseng remedy, but really we're going to sell you mushroom spores, or, oh, we sell this thing, but we're going to call it a spore syringe, you know, like whatever that was. Like these people were very specific about what they wanted from us, and they knew. Like they went through our website with a fine-tooth comb and were like, you can't say this, you need to remove this, this suggests this. I mean, they were very, what's a good way of putting it, informed about the marketplace and the risk that they were taking. And that was a direct result of that DEA letter opening up that possibility for the bank to say it's okay to do business with these companies now, because we don't, like, we have some clarification as to what they're doing isn't legal, or isn't illegal, I should say, or questionable in some way. So it definitely changed things for us as far as operational concerns go.
Of course, they picked the right lawyer. The head shops had a good lawyer, because to have that law firm be able to get the DEA to, or the DEA to issue that statement is you know, somebody got a nice dinner out of that.
Oh, I hope so. I would love to.
Yeah,
You know what I mean? I feel an obligation. I owe somebody an Outback gift card or something. You know what I mean? Like, come on, guys, let me know, because it did. I mean, it really. I don't want to understate this, but it really did clarify things. And like I said again earlier, no judgment on what other people decide to do with their time, effort, and energy. But if you didn't pay attention to that letter, and adjust your business operational procedures accordingly, I don't know that you could have gotten a better, you know, in the 20 something years we've been doing this, there's never been a more clear, a clear signal than somebody getting arrested, right? So it either takes that or a letter like this to sort of set the tone for the industry. So we'll see. And as I mentioned earlier, the whole notion of pushback, I feel like, you know, in some, I mean, the same thing happened with the guy. What was the guy smoking salvia and videotaping him on? I can't remember the guy's name, but got super famous, like smoking salvia and freaking out on YouTube, and then that literally got salvia scheduled. They used his YouTube videos in the congressional hearings to. So you know, that's part of, like I said, responsible stewardship in the industry, but just kind of being mindful about what it is that we do as a business and how it can impact how people potentially are able to interact, or the legal framework for this industry, right? I mean, we don't want to rock the boat there. Come on,
Man, I can tell you this. So all that makes sense to me, and it's true. I'm also sitting back going, this is a sign of a very large attitude shift from the three-letter agency we know and love as the DEA, but then also just overall a governmental attitude shift, because and this is just me stepping back thinking about this for myself. um the like you just said, it's implicit. Everybody knows that a million people in the country have not developed a microscopy hobby, right? We all know this. The DEA knows this. Everybody knows this. The banks know it, like you just said. Everybody knows. And so that statement almost just feels like a tease for what's to come. That, like, give us some time. We can't make radical changes in the scheduling. We can't, but here's the clarity you wanted. You know, it's almost like engineering firms got R&D, they got a new invention, they can't start and unveil that invention until they recoup their R&D expense, right? It's all just like operational logistics. And so it has me pretty excited, because there's no other reason they would issue that statement and make the decision to issue that statement if that didn't mean there was a trajectory in that direction. Because why would they give that up?
I would say that that it does seem like a concession in a way to say, like, oh, okay, we can see this thing, like, but it wasn't like there was an argument being presented. I don't think these lawyers were trying to advocate for one thing or another. They were just actually looking for clarification. So that should tell you a little bit more about their mindset, and also too what they're prioritizing. I think that realistically, people will probably only find themselves afoul of this, the whole process, if they're just egregious in some way or another. And, you know, I hate to say that, but, you know, we're pretty risk averse. So you're not going to find that egregiousness coming from us. But yeah, it is an interesting direction. I don't, you know, nobody knows what's going to happen in the future when it comes to psychedelic, you know, or psychedelics research, what that means. I mean, it could just mean removing restrictions for drug approvals or research level stuff. I mean, we could still very much find ourselves in a position where, you know, things don't change dramatically when it comes to the, um, you know, individual, as it were, because some of this stuff is removing institutional barriers, I think, is the big concern, right, with research and things like that. But yeah, it's interesting to think, like, will we find ourselves in a place where psilocybin's potentially descheduled or reclassified in a way that allows it to be, you know, or is it already there by default, right? That's also the big question that I get proposed by a lot of people, where they're like, you know, people just don't seem to give a fuck. And I'm like, I don't know if they're there yet, you know, like I have my suspicions about that. It's just, there's not a whole lot of clarity right now, other than that letter, which I think was pretty clear, but it does seem like a lot of people have operated in, I wouldn't say clear defiance, but certainly, um, certainly pushing the boundaries when it comes to that kind of stuff, especially, like you said, like people are just selling cultured plates Do we know if those plates contain psilocybin? I don't know. I mean, maybe, probably. I don't know. That kind of stuff.
Or do we know what methodology the DEA would use if to test it, and would it detect it? And yeah, there's a bunch of what ifs and concerns and all that kind of stuff around that. Yeah, but I would like to believe I believe what I see and hear, what's provable, what I have evidence for, and so far a lot of the evidence seems to be a pretty big paradigm shift in the attitude towards psychedelics. Um,
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100% support that sentiment. I mean, of course, I think for us, we saw it happen and begin with the Michael Pollan book, How to Change Your Mind. I think I can point to that as a key moment in the industry for awareness and just one of those things where it was like, oh, obviously you run a business, you have an expectation on how things go day to day, week to week. And then all of a sudden you're like, what happened last week? Oh, this book came out. Wow. You know what I mean? It really made an impact. And then from that point, of course, that's put us in the position that we're in right now. And even like us having this conversation with you today, putting our company maybe in a little bit better position to become part of the conversation as it develops and we're able to approach it from a safe place and involve ourselves with the discussion as people want us to be involved, right? I mean, I understand that wonderful science is happening right now, and there's a lot of great stuff happening that we'd love to sort of sync up on. But having sort of explored the sort of, I guess you would say, like, the sacrifice that's been made, it infuriates me on some level to not even be able to participate in conversations in some way. Like even the gatekeeping that happens right now, as I would have to create a user account that has no connection to Spore Works to be able to join a conversation on certain Reddit subreddits, because even just representing as a Spore Works, official Spore Works Reddit account, like they would kick me out. I mean, I've been banned from our shrooms for posting a picture of a linii. Come on, guys. Do you think we were really trying to shill a linii on our shrooms? Like, it was a cool picture, man. So that's the kind of stuff that we run up against still when it comes to just being able to participate in some way with the current conversation, right? The scope of the marketplace, as it were.
well, it's lonely at the top, guys.
No, not at all.
Lonely at the top. It is lonely at the top. In order to stick around, in order to execute the vision and to do what you're doing, and to have the wherewithal to be very legally responsible around it and operate in this, you're right up to the edge. You're at the cliff's edge all the time. How can I stay right there and keep doing this? But you never get to cross that line. But hopefully we're in the not too distant future. Who knows how that climate's going to change, hopefully for the better. So John, you're watching all these crosses and isolations, and you're seeing all this crazy stuff. And I would not call myself the authoritative cube historian, but I know a few things. I have a lot of friends that have been around, and I've been told a bunch of stories. I'm inclined to think that the absolute beginning of what is now the current vibe in this cubensis community started with a little fruit called ape. And you're the guy to talk to about that one. And so for a lot of people listening who have never heard the story, for a lot of people who don't know the history or all that, a lot of new people in the space right now going, holy cow, there's a million cultigens. There's a million different strains. I mean, dear God, I didn't know one species could do so many things. To the point where even newbies get confused, and in their head they think, I can just cross any mushroom with any mushroom, right? I can cross a monkey with a zebra. They are not delineating, because there's so much variety within the species of cubensis because of all this work at home, underground, for fun or for profit. But I think it really started, the tone shifted. And, if you want to take credit or deny it, but I think it started with APE because it was such a phenomenal isolation. Tell all these people the ape story, and then what it's like being the guy who did that thing and seeing like, wow, that, yeah, man, I really truly believe that planted a seed in the community that had a big impact. You and probably Jick Phipps, who isolated Tat and then started a little cluster of people that did a lot of breeding work. I would say you two really completely shaped what we got going on right now, and you were the first. So we can't not talk about ape.
I guess it started when I got a hold of some of the PF albino spores, and everybody just assumed that PF albino was sporeless. Nobody actually looked at it under the microscope, but I did, and I saw spores, and I go, "Oh, there are spores, and they're clear. They're essentially white or colorless." And I thought I should save these spores for the future. Let me plate some out, but they were unviable or sparse because I was getting very few colonies forming on plates. And it occurred to me that these are probably monokaryons. They're 1-2 spores per plate. What can I do with that? And I had just gotten a fungal genetics book that talked about the chain reaction of nuclei going through the whole mycelium. And there's a 3-part blog on the Spore Works website that goes into this in really good detail. So I knew I could probably cross these, and I made a simplified method, and this is in 2005, and I spelled out this is how you can do a breeding method without a lot of technical skill or much work. Seems easy to me, and I thought it was just going to explode at that time. So released APE in 2006, and then nothing. No one was doing any breeding. And I did the breeding of the PF albino with the Penis Envy strain just because these are two totally different looking mushrooms. If I get anything in between, I'll know that the hybridization worked. So that was the main reason to choose those two. And I expected that I would get a normal looking mushroom if I crossed these two mutants. And I did. And I don't really see that with all the breeding. And I haven't really looked into it. I mean, there's so many breeding projects going on where you get the normal looking mushroom, and then the next generation from the multispore, that's where all your mutants come from, your F2. And I'm not really seeing that. Maybe I'm missing it. I don't know. But it did take a long time before the breeding took off. And boy, did it take off. Man, there are so many weird things. The one that really interested me the most was the Enigma, because that looks totally unlike a mushroom at all. Maybe a coral mushroom, but yeah, it's pretty amazing. And if I go online and I go Ape cubensis, man, you see there's like a ton of hits. And it's, I don't know of any vendor that does not have one form of ape or another. Some of them are claimed to be the original, and a lot of them are hybrids of other things. But they all look pretty similar. I know there's some other albinos that are in the mix that aren't related that also look similar. But I mean, yeah, you can see the ape footprint is pretty huge. I guess that's my legacy. No one in my family knows about it, but
making white penis
it's definitely significant. It is truly one of the special cultigens out there. Now, I will give my thoughts on what you mentioned about you're not seeing wild morphology as much on the crosses. I think that has to do with whether the person is doing truly isolating monokaryons and absolutely doing a true mon cross. One of my friends, that's all he does, And those are very much, a lot of people will criticize them and say, well, your F1's just like boring looking cubes. And by F2, by F3, that's where sometimes the magic really starts happening. Now, some people are now doing the diamond crosses, and those seem to be a little bit more exciting out of the gate for some reason. The one I'm most interested in that you can probably never prove one way or the other is people will, a lot of these guys growing a lot of mushrooms, a lot of different varieties, they started double swabbing. Just a little stroke here, a little stroke there, go back and forth a couple times, streak it out. And my hunch of what's happening is there's so much mono karyons, they're germinating, and you got all these tiny little dikaryons forming, but then now they're all competing amongst one another, and for some reason, in some way, it seems to change whatever the final winning dikaryon is. It seems to be a little more interesting out of the gate. I don't know how you could ever prove that. That's way beyond me, but I will agree with you that depending upon when you release the cross, if you release a F1, F2, F3, F9, F10, that will change kind of what the look is. But I want to bring this up too. I think you were chatting on one of the shows one time, and I forget if I asked it on the show or in private. I can't remember, but I asked you about your perspective, and you said, and you're sort of alluding to it here tonight, that you thought that the minute you showed everybody this ape fruit, that they were all going to go, oh, this is cool, I want to do that. But that the breeding frenzy, you were like, I couldn't believe it took so long.
Right. And I still can't. I mean, I spelled it out. Here's how you do it. It's not hard. And I expected a few people to, and maybe they did, and it just never came to light.
All I can think is the internet played a role. Social media played a role, because you got Jick Phipps, a Canadian grower, isolates an albino golden teacher, and he starts doing. It's just some of these germinations just are more likely to do interesting things than others. And he got this, and he was working it, and he got a group of other cultivators to kind of join a group. It was like a club, a breeding club, and they would all be working on their projects. And when they would have to get to like F6, F7, they'd have to then send swabs out to everybody. They'd have to grow it out. And so when things started getting released from this collective, there was like a buzz. There was like a group of people, and those people had relationships with other people, and social media was happening, and there were, online communities forming. And so I think just the right pieces of the puzzle were in place at that point. And finally that happened. I can't imagine being you though, and have an ape out there and having discovered the possibilities, the endless possibilities, and just wondering, what's up, guys? How are you guys not doing this? It's crazy to imagine.
Maybe some of that was profitability too, right? Like what you're describing in the more like with the TAP project too, right? But more recently, there's a way for folks to make that profitable for themselves pretty immediately by taking those whatever generation straight to culture, right, and distributing plates or syringes in that way, where there was something very unique about Albino Penis Envy for us, and actually harvesting material to be able to distribute in the way that we did and continue to do, but probably created a disconnect, right, where a lot of times these crosses or these hybridizations would end up being sporeless. So how do you distribute that, right? And even as a collector back then, not very many, like, collectors would exchange material by mycelium, you know what I mean? Like but still that was a risk, right? But to commercialize it now, and like you mentioned, I mean, somebody can take make a couple stacks of plates, sell them for 10 to 15 bucks a piece, make a little mint for the week, and they're good, right? Fund the next project, keep going. I don't think that existed, obviously, like right around the time that John was doing this work with us in the 2000s. So finding a way to either get it distributed if you did have a genetic cross like that and make it worth your while, if it wasn't just a true like community effort, right? If it wasn't just like an altruistic goal amongst fellow cultivators, right?
And you bring up a good point about the logistics of it being nearly sporeless, and John having a scope that wasn't everybody back then. So yeah, you there's a few, you're right, logistical issues that might have impeded that process as well. Which, God, I mean, I'm sure, John, you must be sitting here thinking, Jesus Christ, we could be 20 years down the road right now if y'all had only paid attention and realized that it wasn't just about the fruit, it was about what the fruit represented through the tech and the process. We did eventually get there. We did eventually figure it out. The internet has definitely, I mean, it's democratized information in a way that we're now, Meta's figured it out. Meta said, wait a minute, there's people on our platform making money for themselves. This platform was for us to make money. What's up? And now they're reining that in. But good for you for having that thought and figuring it out and trying that experiment and basically setting the tone for, I mean, what we're up to these days. It's pretty awesome, and definitely a legacy I would be super proud of. That's, I mean, thank you. Yes, that continues to be an extremely important cultigen that inspires people to do all sorts of really cool things with strains and morphologies, and it's really cool. I'm really hoping that as the vibe mellows out legally and culturally, I think that we're going to just see some, Robert keeps talking about the citizen scientists. I think some amazingly exciting, really cool things are going to be happening in the space in the coming 5 to 10 years. I cannot wait. So APE, that's a thing you did.
Yeah, that's a thing. It's surprisingly potent too. That was just kind of a side effect.
Yeah.
Which I thought, I just want it to look cool.
All right, well, that's fun. And I want to make sure that newbies that didn't know understood that in that little piece. I think it's very important. So let's talk about something that Robert had been talking to me about, which is a belief, and everything. The story you just told is informed by this. Your beginning origins are informed by this, which is the relationship you have to a microscope. As an amateur, as a guy who just was growing some mushrooms from a kit, a homestead kit, and then you do this and you're like, hey, buddy, you are not selling as arrescents. What's the deal? And what you see going on today and what I see going on today, talk me through the philosophy of the importance of the microscope. Why should people who buy material from you guys, who listen to my show, why is that not an optional piece of gear?
Obviously, we want people to be able to have confidence in, what it is that we're providing them, right? So the microscope becomes an important tool when it comes to knowing what you're receiving just from a technical standpoint, and what you're working with, right? The notion of performing your own microscopy is important on another level too, because in many cases, as people approach this market and want to either trade or sell you certain things, the only way for you to really know what you're looking at is to actually look at it, right? Not make an assumption. And this can come in the forms of distributed genetic material. It can also come in the form of like consumables, right? So the whole notion of like, was this thing that I bought that says magic mushrooms in quotation marks on the front cover of it actually a thing that contains magic mushrooms? I don't know that. Do you know that? The only way for me to know is for me to actually look at those mushrooms under a microscope and confirm that on my own side. It's key. It's key to know, because in a, like you mentioned, culture vultures and all sorts of other things. This is a industry or a community that's ripe with the ability to be able to deceive, and the only way that you can see through that deception is by verification. And if other people are doing that verification for you, and you're working under that assumption, you know what they say about assumptions, right? Like, unless it's a trusted source, and I hate to say like trust but verify, right? We're going to send you the best possible thing as we understand it. Hopefully you trust us to the point where you don't have to necessarily go through those extra steps to verify. But at the same time, was that thing that you got from that guy on Instagram actually what that guy on Instagram said it was? Whether or not it was a sample of a cubensis mushroom spore print or actual like crazy looking things in a bag, that you just bought from them. So, that's in my mind anyway, the important aspect of it is coming from just knowing what's in your lab, knowing what's in your body, knowing what's on your plates. Very important, and not just trusting or assuming what, you're collecting is in fact those things, right? Or you might find something entirely different. Like John said, that microscope will show you those spores on that albino penis skin, on that albino penis envy gill, right? So,
yeah, I guess if you want to put albino penis skin under a microscope, you could do that too, but I don't know what website you have to go for that. That might be a very niche website.
Oh, that's also behind a paywall for sure.
Yes, definitely behind a paywall, probably on the dark web.
Yeah, and this speaks to the point that we were mentioning earlier too about the gatekeeping of information that's happening right now when it comes to access to things and people being able to verify in a way that is what's a good way of putting it, just sort of like available to them. We mentioned this as a joke earlier. You go search the word psilocybin on Facebook and you'll be shamed, and they'll ask you if you have a drug problem. You know what I mean? That's unacceptable. It's the name of a scientific species, of mushrooms. Like, why? What's appropriate in that regard, Facebook, right? You have an entire community of scientists dedicating their lives to the study of this mushroom. Get over yourselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, that's the whole point of it too, with the verification process, is that you just don't know. Even the information that you're getting from some of these places has likely been managed or edited or massaged in some way, or restricted entirely, whether or not they're preventing your access to it or preventing the person who wants to share it with you from sharing it. That's been the big thing. And I'm sure you've run across this with other people in the industry, even just vendors and cultivators or, alike, right? People who don't even have financial interest having their work that they've been sharing with the community just disappear or be restricted or removed from these platforms. And the censorship that takes place in that regard is a huge form of gatekeeping when it comes to having access to that data and information. So just try and find ways to fight around that too. The microscope lets you verify, lets you go back to that idea of like, I can know that what I'm doing is based on this thing that is verifiable.
Now, something that I've seen a lot in the community is you sort of have two camps. You have it's just a hobby, but of course I'll buy a flow hood. It looks cool. You told me that it makes life easier. Yeah, I got $1,000 sitting around, no big deal. Then you got the other people then who hate those guys because they don't have $1,000 laying around. They're broke. So it becomes a class issue. So I've thought a lot about, I talk about how much I love a flow hood and how I do truly believe that it makes, especially if you're a vendor. Like for me, the concept of being a vendor without a flow hood seems very questionable, and your return policy better be real nice. Right. But there's a class component. There's an economic component to it. So you got these people coming in, they want access to the medicine, they want to grow it themselves because these days, who knows what's in the shit you're getting from somebody you don't know. but then, we got to teach them how to do it as cheaply and efficiently as possible. And then now I got to tell them they got to buy a microscope.
Well, yeah, right.
But I don't, because if I know quality vendors that are doing this work, and I can go, I stake my reputation on the fact that these guys do this well.
Right.
I got friends where I can say, you buy spores from them, they're going to be clean. And if in some very off chance they're not, they won't even hesitate to send you another set.
Exactly.
That's the standard we got to go for. But ideally, anybody who can afford a couple $100 for a microscope. When you said that, we see this as something a lot that needs to be mainstreamed into the community. A lot more people need to do this. I was like, amen. Yes, I think that's great.
Yeah.
Look at what the microscope has done for John. It got him in here. It got him doing APE, right? What John? Tell me about your relationship with your microscope.
Oh, I love the microscopes. I've got 3, and it really helps to have a camera attached. That way you can share what you're looking at. There for a while, people were offering on the shroomery, gill fragments of their finds just so I could identify them. And I did my best, but it's difficult to pin these things down. There's quite a bit of variance within a species. I mean, you can get it close. But a lot of the descriptions now don't even exist. Like, for example, there was that species that was found in Georgia, and it was called Psilocybe atlantis. And it was well described. And I got some material from the original collector, but it was a different collection. And I threw it under the scope, and it was similar, but it wasn't exactly the same. And I sent cultivated examples to Gaston Guzman, and he said it wasn't Atlantis either. And it was just confusing what this actually could be. So I went through all the literature, and the closest match I could get to was Galindii. So I said, maybe it's that. I mean, it's like way out of range, but ultimately, it genetically was confirmed to be Tampanensis. And Atlantis was also confirmed to be Tampanensis. So I guess it was the same species, but it just looked different. But DNA is just a boon. I love that you can, get close with microscopy, but you can really pin it down to species with some DNA. And, then you can start seeing the relationships with other species and when they diverged. But yeah, I've got a lot of microscopy, and I was trying to get the Australian species figured out, and that's still a mess. Even with DNA, it's difficult.
Yeah, and some genera they cooperate, and some don't. There are definitely some notorious.
Well, there's some that are so similar.
Yeah,
like the cyanescens group. I mean, you got Alenii, Azuricins, and the cyanescens, and I mean, microscopically, you really can't tell the difference. And the mushrooms look different.
Unless you want a PhD, and then you stay under that scope until you can.
Yeah, you can always find differences.
Yeah.
Yeah, even with what was it? It was some sort of cystidia that was not seen on the Tampanensis, but I was finding it easily, and that was Guzman's. I think it was Guzman's examination of Pollock's single specimen when it was like the only specimen that was available. And we still have that original culture banked, the original Pollock culture. which it's not the best performer, but I want to keep it for legacy purposes.
When Robert was talking about, oh, we got 10-year-old prints, but that's not what we send out. In my head, I was going, maybe you should. I know a lot of guys that would that the minute you said 10-year-old prints, they would go, oh, okay, here we go.
No, I've got some much older than that. I got some 20-year-old stuff, and some of it's still alive, surprisingly.
I would say to that point, there's been because of the things that have aligned us to where we are right now, and what we have available to us with this facility in Vienna, you will start to see much of our Spore catalog reinvest.
Oh yeah, we have
awesome.
Huge bank.
Right. And most of that has been, it's one level for, like, I guess this goes to your point earlier when we talk about acceptable risk. It's one thing for a citizen scientist to assume that there's a level of risk they want to work with when exploring some of these varieties. And that can change for them depending on where they're located here in the US, right? So for our brothers and sisters in Colorado who can basically just go at it, man, I mean, that's awesome. More power to you. For us, it required heavy investment and sort of development and infrastructure that we could then maintain in perpetuity. I mean, we use big words, but forever, essentially. Like, we didn't want to invest in something that could then come back on us. So the whole point of that is to say that, we have this amazing catalog of material that people have submitted to us over the years that we've collected, much of it wild genetics collections that will be re-explored, but putting us in a position to be able to do that legally in a way that we can share it legally, right? So it's one thing for folks to be able to develop these land races and or these strains and crosses or whatnot, but they're still very much doing it in a way that might expose them, put them at risk, depending on where they're at and who they're shipping it to. But for us, obviously being able to do that, you'll see. I hate to say you'll see coming soon, as it were. A new breed of genetics will be entering our catalog as we kind of go back through a lot of this material, because you're right. Like our cultivators over there, our managers in that lab, they want those samples because they've been working with this material that's been available, and a lot of it's just not great. Some of it isn't awesome, and you want to find these stable races that you can promote and put out there into the world, and that's a big part of it.
But I'm gonna tell you, Robert, it's like people like whiskey or whatever booze they like, right? They'll buy an $800 bottle of whiskey that actually tastes worse than a $50 bottle of whiskey, just so they can go around and go, look what I got. I tasted it and you didn't. So I'm gonna tell you right now, I want the Spore Works search button to pull me up a tab of like 10-year-old prints, 15-year-old prints, 20-year-old prints. This is the top shelf reserve print catalog, or the live cultures derived from that. You will find yourself a whole new group of people ready to peruse your offerings for sure.
I think you'll see that. I mean, like I said, not to discount that, but a lot of this material, it's got to be evaluated, right? Because we have a cool thing that you'll see, and this is something that we're super excited about, with the capacity to be able to collect data on the level that we are. We'll be able to share this information with people about performance levels of these strains, how they react to the environments that we're putting them in. I mean, this is all data that our Spore Works EU counterparts will be able to publish, right? Because they're working in a legal framework where they're able to do that, and that information will be available to folks here, right? Because it came out of their lab. So that's going to be awesome to be able to have that extra level of data set provided. I mean, it's almost like we have our own private psilocybin cup that can happen over there on a constant basis, right? With analysis and reports and data coming out of it. So we're really excited about that. It's a big project for us this year to kind of get it out into the world, because it's a thing and it exists. And these people are very busy right now, but to actually get it out there and for people to have access to it is going to be a big part of this year for us.
So since we're starting to talk about it, talk to me about this new facility, the bells and whistles, what you're excited about, how this is going to change your product offering in a little bit more detail, why this is good for people who like to go to sporeworks.com.
So, and John can chime in here too with some of the developmental work that'll take place with our relationship with these folks. But essentially, this facility was built from the ground up. This wasn't a repurposed concept of any imagination. So, our providers who immigrated to Austria to start this venture in an environment where it's completely legal. So it's important to stress that even in Europe, there are different, obviously, regulations and restrictions. We have to deal with some there as well. Folks would be interested to know that the entire process and many parts of the process are filmed because they have to have it constantly monitored and they have to be able to turn over those tapes if they're ever requested. They're not allowed to dry the mushrooms. So all the mushrooms that we produce, they're harvested for spores and then they're returned to whence they came in the compost pile. So this is how they go out the door to the compost pile.
Sacrilege.
That is
Look at the sacrifices they make for you guys, for us.
100%. Nothing but extended captions.
So we can have mushrooms. They have to throw out their mushrooms.
Right. And it's part of the legal operation, right? So people understand that that's not turning into some sort of like microdose pill that we're selling on Instagram.
Well, no, you're microdosing the earth.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, some parts of that earth some parts of the earth are tripping balls. So the other part of it too with this facility is that it was, of course, designed for the production of spore material. That's what our bread and butter is. So that way you will see and I think many people have already witnessed this, our spore catalog has become a lot more robust in the last year because we've been able to restock and continually restock a lot of the varieties that we carry. This is mostly cubensis, mind you, because there are limitations with exotic varieties. And they will be exploring those because the capacity they have allows the environments to be tuned for those varieties that are responsive to indoor cultivation. So we'll also see, and John will help shepherd this in working with them, a reinvigoration of the exploration of some of these non-cubensis varieties as well, especially the ones that we can work with inside. But as far as it concerns us here, of course, they'll be developing we say things like new strains, specifically for desirable characteristics that commercial producers are looking for, or other, unique morphology, right? That's always been our thing. It's either geographic distribution, unique morphology, high performance. We want to keep a level or pay attention on that stuff. So there is that. And it's important to understand that this allows us to maintain this Loctite legal foundation. Our spores aren't coming from someplace in Louisiana or someplace in Colorado even. I mean, they are legitimately being imported from a legal production center so that we can share that level of security with our customers. The other part of it too, and the exciting thing that we've sort of started to focus on, is actually opening and essentially a Spore Works in Europe. So we will have sporeworks.eu. It's a thing. People can go there now. It doesn't really work very well. So, but it's under development and will soon be an operational web store in which folks in the EU specifically will be able to purchase a good chunk of our catalog. So there will be spore syringes available as well as spore prints, all shipped and developed from within Austria. So it will come, not from overseas, all managed there. So lots of people are anticipating that, looking forward to it, because the state of mushroom genetic supply in Europe is not like it is here. It really just isn't. There's a huge deficit when it comes to stable, well-maintained genetics, and we're hoping that our team there will be able to do a good job with providing that service to these customers.
So I'm going to tell you right now, I'm going to personally thank you for that, because I send a lot of genetics to Europe, just because I get so many sad stories of, I got nothing here. I have made some amazing friendships through it. I got just a random little guy in a very tiny village in the Netherlands. I got people in all these little spots, and they're like, you're reshaping, like you're changing the scene here because you're sending me these cool strains to work that I just couldn't get. I cannot tell you how many times I've heard that. Nobody will send it to me. Poor me. And of course, I'm just like, it's like a badge of pride for me. Spread the spores means something for me, so I got to do it. And now I don't. Thank you, because
Well,
my days are too full right now. So
I will
amen. Thank
say
you, Jesus.
this is a direct result to a dilemma that you just mentioned too. Since COVID, and this is just a logistical thing, right? Since COVID, the methodologies for businesses to send international mail from the US, like especially first class international and stuff like that, it just doesn't exist anymore. And outside of taking individual packages to the local post office, there just isn't a good mechanism for companies on the scale like ours to send product, even our product, which is small. Most of it'll fit in a small padded envelope or a small box, but just doesn't exist the same way it was. Like, for example, even for us to send something to Canada right now using the system that we use, which most people do, Indicia.com, USPS, stamps.com, whatever it is, it's the thing. They ship it from Knoxville to some processing facility in New York, which is basically a remailer that then ships it to the customer in Canada. That whole process takes like 2.5 weeks. Well, they can't do that now because I don't think the people are working in Canada in the postal service, but you get what I'm saying. Like that, in like a thing that used to take 7 days and cost $10 now takes over 2 weeks and costs 30. It's just not cost efficient, and the customers don't get a product, patrons too don't get a product that's comparable because it's been in the mail stream. It may have been cooked, it may have been frozen, it may have gotten heat. But the idea of us opening or having the Spore facility become more of a retail outlet was basically a evolution of that problem. Like, well, we have something going on in Europe, let's just ship from there, rather than trying to figure out ways to get it outside the US. I mean, for the other vendors and the people in the space who have figured out how to ship stuff out of the US, man, keep it going. That's awesome. But for us, it's just like, it seems to be a nightmare to be able to do it reliably and efficiently and to a way that customers just don't complain about why they got to pay,
Yeah, most people will echo that sentiment. There are a lot of vendors who are like, I just stopped sending over there, whether it was tariffs and fees or this or held or lost or whatever. And they just said it just wasn't worth it at the end of the day.
And we want to spread our spores. I mean, we have customers there that like they want our material and they will buy from a remailer here or have a friend in the States buy our stuff and then send it to them. I mean, all of that just seems grossly unnecessary. So hopefully we'll be able to do that. And as part of that, we'll see those developments take place with the genetics, because they'll be working new material stuff from our catalog. Also the exotics as we move into them and start to, I know a big project for John has always been the exploration of the Panoleus genre mushrooms, because there's only a limited number of known varieties, right? He figured that we could just tackle, we could
get them all.
We could get them all. We could Pokemon them and just have all the Paniolus, catalog them, do proper taxonomy, publish information where it's been unpublished. So maybe this will help give us a better foundation for being able to finish that kind of work.
Now I say that we can get them all, but there's a lot of new ones just kind of popping up all the time. The DNA is like exposing new species all the time, so it may not be as easy as I first thought.
All right, so I got a question for you guys. I kind of pay attention to decriminalization efforts, policy and all this kind of stuff. Definitely not an expert, but I don't think Austria ever hit my radar. I would have never in a million years guessed that's where you guys would have a production facility. Why don't you let's give me that story? Like why Austria? And then what was that process like? Starting the facility, just all that kind of stuff. I'm definitely curious.
Right. And it's an exciting part of our more recent story, I guess, because of what's happened and the ability to be able to make this happen. Right. So Austria became part of our calculus, mostly because we've always looked for a Loctite, verifiable production source for spores, right? And the decision to make this move and invest in this process happened probably around 2000, 2001, right? So we're, a little bit of a time arc here with what's happened since then. So our decision to sort of put our eggs in that basket was done with the knowledge that we had at the time, which was, I think, pre-Oregon decriminalization, Colorado. I think Colorado's like 18 or 19 or something like that, right? I can't remember exactly, but it was around that time, right? So the choice was, all right, we have very skilled cultivators in Europe that are already providing us spore material. They are looking for a more stable environment to operate in as well. So let's put our minds together and our resources together to make that happen. And they did the legwork. They discovered that they could, the legal framework in Austria allowed for the production of mushrooms in a fresh form for the harvesting of spores. That covered our needs. They were able to immigrate there successfully. All of the stuff was done, like I mentioned, starting this farm checklist for all of the legal requirements, like video cameras and destroying the mushrooms and all this other stuff, just to make it happen there, to be able to operate in that environment. Now, could the same thing had been done, say, in Oregon or Colorado or some other sort of, I don't want to use air quotes too much, or sort of like quasi-legal areas, because these people have regulations and they have whatever legal frameworks are in place. For us, that was not airtight, not with the federal stipulations, not with the federal oversight or guidelines still in place. Like, until that happens, it's still a risk. So we wanted to make sure that we stayed squarely outside of that risk. And since you talked about this earlier too, the whole idea of the psychedelic zeitgeist sort of moving us in this direction of more progressive policy, and that's awesome. It's also a big assumption to assume that it's going to continue. So for us to or continue at the pace that it's continuing without some sort of significant setbacks along the way. So as far as we were concerned, we didn't want to find ourselves in a position to invest in the infrastructure of our business based on the current attitude in the US and then have those laws rearranged on us because of whatever reason, right? But over there, we knew, like, they got it figured out. They're not going to change their mind on this stuff. So that really became the reason for the investment there and how that came up on our radar. We had already been working with these suppliers in the EU, and they knew that, okay, well, if we move to Austria, we can do this there above board in a way that operates within their legal framework. So, like I said, maybe there's a couple of other places where that could happen too, but it just, the pieces all came together for us on that particular project, and they were able to, it's a good way of putting, I have some really cool talking points from them on what they were getting in through, but it's essentially a standalone farm, with highly developed controls and clean rooms and processing rooms and spore printing rooms. I mean, we've shared some images on our social media, even of just their spore printing operation, which is effing impressive. So, even by my standards, it's just like, wow, this is really, really cool what you guys are doing right now. So that kind of put us in a position to really enjoy that, and allows us to do something different than what most other major suppliers are doing here. Like, whatever their investment is in their infrastructure, it's working for them and providing the material they need. But this is what we needed to do to get our material in a legal way, but also to create a partnership with a lab that allowed us to continue to do the work that we like to do, which is, taxonomy and strain development and cataloging and that sort of stuff. And that's where, even with John being able to be a little bit more involved in the legal frameworks changing a little bit here in the States, it still gives us a higher level of flexibility and sort of, I don't know, just sort of legal padding when it comes to that stuff.
All right, so I mean, you guys have been in that piece has been in Austria for a while. It's just that there's a new facility now.
They've been operating in some form either out of Eastern Europe or that area for as long as our relationship has been with them. The formulation of this and building of this farm just allowed it to be a more permanent facility in an area that was a lot more restriction free. And the process itself took, I mean, it was a good 2.5 year process to secure the site, bring in we've got, it's a sort of, I don't want it to undersell this when people hear stuff like this, but it's a container based lab and growing operation. But over in Europe, they have containers that are like high tech, built for this purpose, right? We have companies here in the US that have gotten on board with building mushroom growing containers, like, right? But it's not like they do it over there. 100% not like they do it over there. So that's what this is all based on, and it's an impressive facility for that purpose. But they were able to put all that together, use the material that's used in the European mushroom growing economy, which is a lot more open than ours. I mean, they share knowledge over there a lot more than we do. Commercial mushroom growers in the United States are notoriously closed mouth about methodologies and about processes. Over there, they share it like openly. They're like, this is the best way to do it. You should do it. And I'm like, yes, I agree. Thank you. So it's just a different, just a different culture and mindset. So we were able to take advantage of that a little bit as well.
Oh, the socialists. Look at them taking care of one another, helping them out.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
Wow.
I mean,
what do you know?
For this purpose, I mean, it's worked out. I mean, phenomenally. We're most of, like, for example, most of the updated imagery that you see on sporeworks.com, especially with the new strains that we're selling, that's all coming from the Austrian facility. So pretty much most of our Instagram feed these days, or our Blue Sky feed, or whatever else you want to find us on various social medias, that's what they're doing, because that's where it's done, and that's where we can feel safe in knowing that too, because we don't risk, some sort of like clandestine or semi-clandestine or under the radar grow operation here in the US for the purpose of producing spores. It just doesn't compute for us when it comes to that. And I know we're an outlier when it comes to how we handle the marketplace like that, because we're not culture vulture, and we're not, we're not just taking things and expanding mycelium.
Definitely respectable. And as I now am entering, a little over 4 years in this space, I got very few people who have been around for that whole ride.
A lot of stuff gets hung on things in this building because psychedelics are powerful and potent medicine, and they affect people in very different ways. And, we've talked about the characters that become part of this so-called scene, and the overexposure to people like that, or the fact that sometimes it's just hard to find somebody who's been around longer than 5 years or 10 years or whatever, because of instability or life circumstances or whatever it is that makes that happen. But for us, I mean, the goal has always been that level of stability. I mean, I love doing what I do. I'm sure John would say the same thing. Most of the people that have had the pleasure of working with us or for us over the years, I think, would parrot that sentiment. I know that because of the generosity of our patrons and customers and the success that we found in this marketplace, I mean, a generation of people have benefited from this. It's not just about, you get what I'm saying? It's not just about the other elements. It becomes a very real thing for us on a human level too. And that's to say, like, we want everybody to find that level of love and success and support in this business if it's possible, and they're able to do so in a mindful and
healthy way.
Healthy way is important. I mean, like, we don't want to gatekeep. We don't want to pretend like we're more important than anybody else, or that our contributions are more important than anybody else. If anything, I'd like to think that what we do kind of helps set a model for responsible business in this space. I mean, other people have certainly taken that lead over time, and other people have run with it in different directions, to various levels of degrees of success, right? There have been some players now in this marketplace that do seem to be for real as far as sticking around and being genuine with what they do. Whether or not we agree on the methodologies for which they do it, that's a different thing entirely, right? But for us, what's important is, like, are they selling you what you bought? are you getting what you paid for? Are you happy with that experience? You know what I mean? Like if they're doing those things, then attaboy, have a pat on the back. You're doing a good job. You're treating people respectfully, and you're contributing to the benefit and health of the space by doing that.
Yeah, it's like a good restaurant, right? Like, so in a big city, there's so many restaurants, right? And if I'm a chef and I just open a restaurant and I think that what I'm doing is special and amazing and next level and is worth every overpriced dollar I'm putting on the menu, and then the next week another restaurant opens just down the road. Honestly, what you care about is it garbage? Is it tricking people? Is it playing games? And is it enticing people and trying to take people away from an authentic, real experience you're trying to give? I wouldn't complain about another real deal restaurant just like mine that's just got a different menu. Because now I know, cool, well, when they go to that restaurant, now all the people that go there are getting used to high quality food and high quality experience at a nice restaurant. That guy existing is going to make my restaurant do better. It's just like when somebody moves into your neighborhood and everybody's worried about what color they're going to paint their house, and are they going to put a rusty truck in the front of it, or are they going to do a bunch of improvements and then raise their home value, right? It's that same thing. The quality vendors are helping you guys out indirectly.
I think that's a good way of putting it, from an aspect of, a rising tide, raising all the ships. I mean, we've certainly seen that. I mean, I think that you've touched on this maybe with other folks in the space. It's definitely changed in the last 2 years. I mean, I think that anybody who's talked about the mushroom business and its what has happened, as it were, in recent history, there was certainly a boom in the boomer world, as it were, that occurred right after COVID. And in many cases, like most other industries where folks were just stuck at home and needed projects. I mean, we certainly benefited from a lot of things at the same time. And I think most people in this space would support the idea that since then it has been a decline. The market has become a bit more flooded with competition. So that slices up the pie a lot more. I mean, it's just a part of how capitalism works. It is what it is. Also, I think that there's just a saturation of things happening right now in this space. I mean, when you are somebody that sells, broccoli plants, and all the stores have broccoli, nobody wants broccoli plants. So that's kind of what happened. It's definitely, I think most other vendors in this space would echo that sentiment. The ubiquitousness of mushrooms and their availability on the gray market or ClearNet at this point has certainly changed the demand for a product like ours, and will continue to do so going forward until there's other things that affect that. But just being mindful to approach that with the customers in such a way that continues to pay respect to them and why they come to you, and why why we're all involved in this to begin with, without putting too much importance on it too. That's the important thing. The experience should remind us that we're really not that important.
That we're at least not more important than our fellow man.
Right. And that we should be here for each other ultimately, right? Limited amount of time on this little fucking rock, right? And so that's basically just been our philosophy. And we're gonna do the best thing and let the chips lie where they're going to lie, to use all of the vernacular and all of the things. We're going to keep our side of the street clean. What goes on out there in the world is going to go on out there in the world. And hopefully on the other side of things, we're going to continue to be able to do what we do, right? Offer you quality material and verifiable material. And for what it's worth, a lovely experience, hopefully along the way. That's always been a big part of our mission too, is to have that level of customer service, and respect for our customers too.
Golden rule. You said it at golden rule, where you're operating in a way that reflects how you would want, if you were the customer and not the business, what would you want the business to do for you? If you even have a step in your customer service process that considers those things, you're already ahead of a whole lot of people.
Yeah. Absolutely, because otherwise they got your money.
And there's two ways to go as a genetics vendor. there's two approaches to considering customer service. You can really focus on, well, what's my return policy going to be? What am I going to do in this situation? What do I do about contamination? What do I do about non-germination? Or you can go, I'm going to front end the customer service. I'm going to make sure that I don't have these issues. I mean, I'll have a nice, I'll handle things well if they go wrong, but I would rather prevent them from going wrong. So, like you said, stability of strains, viability of spores. Being mindful about not just presenting everything to the world, but wanting to build a brand that's reliable, trustworthy.
Yeah, and that goes back to your point of the idea of the microscopy and knowing where things come from. Even when you don't have a microscope, you can still at least put stock in a trusted vendor, right? And we've talked a little bit about history, and not to backtrack too much, but there was a point in this whole process where most of what was being offered to the public was in fact gatekept in some way by the communities that existed. So for good or for bad, with the shroomery, when it was the .org and had a very big audience, existed as a way to sort of verify vendors for customers because there was so much scammy stuff happening at the time. They were at least an organization that was interested in saying, okay, these are good people, these are bad people. Now, obviously, all of the good people paid the money, so it wasn't like just an altruistic verification process, but they did in fact screen. Like, they weren't going to take money from a vendor that was known to have bad policies or scam their customers or do XYZ, right? But that, when that sort of defragmented and the decentralization of the community started to occur with Reddit and a few other, like, Telegram, Discord, all these other things where things like conversations could start to take place independently, you didn't have that. You didn't have like necessarily a community gatekeeping organization to put a gold star next to your name as a verified and trusted vendor, right? So it does mean a lot to us when people like you talk about the just the level of trust that people have in what we do and how we've been able to establish and maintain that longevity for such a long time. Because I don't want to say, like, the high ground is a maybe a not apt analogy for this, but we've maintained the high ground when it comes to that sort of stuff, and giving it up means a lot. We fought hard to get there, and so to maintain that level of integrity so that our customers can trust us as far as sourcing goes, and trust that when they place an order, they're going to get their stuff. It is all of those things are very important, and putting that out there for the world to know is an important thing too, because we still get those people that will buy something from us. Their tracking number doesn't work 2 days later because the post office didn't scan it in properly, and they call screaming about how they want their money back because we scammed them, and clearly we still had their package because the post office doesn't have it. And we're like, dude, come on, they picked it up 2 days ago. Like, that's just, it's the world we live in. People are like that, and we have to navigate those waters too. But
Robert, it's like when you date a girl who just got done dating 3 shitty dudes before you, and you got to deal with her attitude because she's coming in assuming you're that shitty dude. It's the same situation. So it is doubly challenging and doubly to be admired, revered, respected, that anybody who is operating in the space, doing business in the space in a respectful way, in an appropriate way, ethical way, there's that whole other layer that of effort and attention. Like,
I will say something that breaks my heart, and you talked about this earlier when it came to the sacrifice that has to be made sometimes. Not that we're falling on swords over here necessarily, but for example, this is a great illustration of a difficulty we face. You go to a website like trustpilot.com. I don't want to necessarily like promote this business, but this is known to be a place where people go air the grievances when they have them with various, any business, right? Any business. It's like the Wild West Better Business Bureau. You go to that place and you look at the reviews for our company, you will see a lot of people that were very upset with their interactions with us, but those were 100% to a T people who just did not approach us in the way that was required for us to be able to service them. And you can tell that, right? So it's that kind of stuff that we have to work against when it comes to reputation building and trust and whatever. We still get people that'll call us and say, oh, I see on this website that you only got a 3-star or whatever, you got all these things. And I'm like, well, yeah, I understand that, but
also, if you've used Yelp for restaurants for any length of time, it doesn't take long to figure out that you don't trust the 5-star reviews. You look at how many reviews there are, and that over time, a restaurant that has 13,000 reviews and it has a 3.6 is actually a phenomenal restaurant.
probably, yeah, right, as opposed to, yeah. And that's kind of the place that we occupy with that, but it does illustrate that disconnect, right, between what people have that assumption of, like, these people were clearly out to scam me, and they couldn't take the moment to realize that, no, we very much just wanted to help you. You just put yourself into a position to make that not possible, either through ignorance or through, whatever else. It is what it is.
And also, the other way that you guys are impacted by the scammers and the tricksters and the shysters and the grifters is, you just talked about it, where you didn't you sent a tracking number, it hadn't processed through the mail yet, and so they're immediately assuming that you're scamming them, and you're not scamming them. But because of that attitude, maybe they go right away and do a review. Right. And you never even had a chance to do that. Or worse than that, this is the one that really gets me, that I would be super frustrated to have to deal with, is there is this whole thing in the community where let's say they buy 5 swab sets, or sorry, 5 spore prints, and they get one and they think it's too small, or they didn't like it, or they tried one time and they didn't get germination for whatever reason. And instead of reaching out, they don't reach out. Now, why don't they? They don't reach out because they have a history of being traumatized and abused by these scammers, and they just stop trying. And you deal with the ramifications of that. You were never even provided a chance to make something right. They just go, I'm going to get back at these guys. And even though you guys might have been absolutely happy to fix this small problem.
I will say that you have to develop a fairly thick skin. I'll use one example very quickly, and there's a small chance this customer may watch this, and this is done with all due respect to them.
Learning lesson right here.
This is all due respect to that person, because this shows you how we handle these situations and ultimately the reasons why we do this. But this was the few weeks leading up till Christmas. The processing facilities here in Knoxville were actually not taking our mail. We get a daily pickup. So they send a truck, they pick up our mail in big bags. It's a thing. They weren't scanning our mail. They were literally taking it to Greenville, South Carolina, where it was then being processed, because our shipping facilities were overrun. So we would, the customer gets a notification that this stuff is shipped, and then it doesn't get updated for 2 or 3 days because it's literally in the system. And this guy stayed, very much what I was using an example of before, called in screaming at my customer service representative about how we were scamming them. They wanted their money back because clearly we still had their package, and they just blah, 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 this, that, and the other. And she's clearly telling this person, no, it is on the way. We can't return, we can't get it, blah, blah, blah. And ultimately I tell her, I said, we'll give him his money back. He was being grossly inappropriate with her at some point, just being very, very abusive. And so I said, give him his money back. We're done. This is what happens when you treat our people this way. You get rewarded by getting your money back. So, right. So ultimately knowing that they, in fact, also were going to get the product, like the product's on the way. We can't recall it. It's been shipped, whatever. So we have now lost money on this person who literally just couldn't handle themselves properly when it came to understanding what my well-trained customer service person was telling them to do. And then, we went round and round with this person. And at some point I just told her, I was like, disengage. They've got their money back. We don't need to do anything to make this person happy. Life will take care of this. And so down the road, a week later, they got their spores. They've gotten their money back. I get an email, like they sent this very long email, like eating a lot of crow. I hate to use that term, but basically just coming to a realization to say, like, this was totally me. I, misstepped. I want to take responsibility for this. They then sent us cash in the mail to pay for the order. So they, you know what I mean? Like, that just shows you how that can go, interaction one way or the other, and just how we're very interested. I mean, we're not trying to take your money. We're not trying to scam you. You were having a hard time there, buddy. And I'm glad something worked out where you learned a life lesson and or appreciation for somebody that was really legitimately trying to look out for you. Maybe you haven't had a lot of exposure to that in your life. So, it was my pleasure.
For customer service, you got to take the high road. The customer's not always right, but you got to have the attitude of that. You got to be as respectful as you possibly can be, because had you guys decided to handle it any other way, of like, screw this guy, or send an email saying, are you a moron? Like, idiot, you're going to get your frickin' thing and deal with it and go kiss my ass. You still would have lost a customer. And instead, now you got a fan. Now that negative situation you turned into a positive.
Yeah. And that's always been our plan with customers, is that we just, like I said, I don't know if this is a theme with what we're talking about here, but I try to disconnect. Like, we're just selling mushroom spores. You know what I mean? We're not, for some people that's a very, very significant thing. And I understand what it means. Don't get me, it's not lost on me at all. The level of just like what this can bring to people's lives. But at the same time, I'm also not trying to attach anything significant to it because of that. I feel like in this space, there's a lot of people who take on that guru complex, or that level of like shamanism, to a level of just sort of insanity, if that makes sense, or self-importance or whatever. But that's not something that we're interested in. And that's a case in point, was just being able to handle those customer interactions like that. So, I hope that, like, you talk about longevity and you talk about stability. I mean, that's been 100% the key element and driving force behind what we do. And like I said, I want to keep doing this for as long as I possibly can. We always used to joke about, we're going to do this as long as they let us. So they've let us do it for a while now.
Oh, much longer than I expected.
Hopefully, pretty soon, your wildest dreams and even the dreams you never even had will come true, and you guys get to play even more fun games. John and I definitely talk about the resurgence, or the broadening of interest around exotic species and cultivating them, and the interest in what novel compounds might be in these adjacent species to cubensis. There's definitely a bunch of anecdotal evidence to suggest there's got to be something else besides the basic tryptamine compounds, or at least the amounts of them that are making some of these other psilocybe species do just like slightly different tonal things within the experience, or how the medicine works. So I'm pretty excited to hear from you guys that, because of this new facility, and the DEA statement, that you guys are probably going to be able to pull out some old school stuff, some top shelf stuff, some exotic stuff, and we're gonna be able to play some new fun games. That's pretty exciting.
Oh, absolutely. No, it's the plan. I mean, it's put us where we are. And of course, being able to navigate the marketplace now is a big challenge. Is the biggest challenge for us, is to be able to make sure that what we do can continue to remain, what's a good word for it? Just to be able to, well, be safe, but also relevant, right? Because there's a lot of things happening that the relevancy of the things that we do or did could become less important to folks as the things happen. But I think we've got a lot to offer, and we're really excited for people to be able to access that in the coming months and over the next few years. I mean, we're gonna hopefully do this until we can't work anymore. I mean, I don't want them to tell me to stop now. I want to be able to retire. Obviously, that's the goal here with everybody. But But two, I mean, just to know that we can continue to integrate with the space and do what we do. It's not just all about personal gain. I know John started this all off conversation talking about why do you get into this money?
When you're a kid, that's all you think about.
Right.
Yeah.
You gotta get
100%.
You got to.
It's completely different now.
Come on, Robert. Young John Workman had every right to be thinking about money. It's all we thought about women and money. That's all we thought about.
Right.
That's it.
Who knows? Maybe in just imagine in 5 to 10 years with possible federal legalization or federal decriminalization efforts, you could be going to high school graduations, and when all the honor society students stand up and announce what they're going to go do, it's like I'm going to be a surgeon. I'm going to be a psychedelic mushroom farmer. Sky's the limit. You never know. Dare to dream. We are all still going to see astounding social changes, technology, innovation in medicine and health. And hopefully we can just keep making psychedelics available for people to explore under the microscope, so that maybe that microscopy can bring some important healing perspective, spiritual depth, all that good stuff. I mean, the microscope really is metaphorically and literally a very important piece of kit. And hopefully everybody watching the show tonight has a better understanding of what you guys are all about, the history, how long you guys have been doing it, the very significant accomplishment of being around for so long, and the very precise way that you set the business up early on to stay here. I mean, if you had not done that, who knows? Who knows?
Lots of things. Very many hurdles have been overcome in the 23, 4 or 5 odd years that we've been doing.
26 now.
26. I'm losing count.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, that's very true. And I appreciate, and the recognition of that does mean a lot. I think it gets lost a little bit.
These days it's important. Nothing's sacred anymore. So yeah, I'm trying to bring a little modern kind of watered down sacred attitude to some of this stuff. Like, it does matter who's here, who's been around, who's still doing it, what wisdom they have, and definitely a whole bunch of stuff for a lot of people to think about. And for new cultivators, the number one thing that they ask me, besides should I fan this tub, should I mist this tub, does it look contaminated, and all the classics, the absolute number one question they ask me is, where should I get my genetics from? So you guys are 100% vetted, trusted, awesome. I mean, everyone at a minimum, if you've never bought something from Spore Works, you got to have that experience.
Please do.
We'd love to have that experience.
We'd love to
check your stuff out. I mean, you guys have been around forever, so maybe check out what y'all got.
Right.
You might be, you've grown Cambodians before? Okay. Have you grown John's Cambodians? Check them out. See what you think.
To that point, be excited about what's coming, because I know there's a lot of great, interesting material out there. The Spore Works Instagram feed is full of these talented, wonderful cultivators who are sharing wonderful genetics with the world, and more power to them. We're very much interested in doing the same. So, get ready, pay attention, look at what's coming from us. It's coming from these wonderful folks in Austria. We maintain our genetics. You're going to get healthy, vigorous stuff to look at under the microscope, and that catalog and that stuff will be done with intention and curated with intention, so that you're able to enjoy the genetic diversity that we find to be the most interesting, in the material that we're working with.
And then, of course, you gotta, at some point in time, you gotta have the space spores. You gotta sell some space spores. You gotta change the name, play that game. Finally, just change one name, call them space spores. I will buy the space spores. I know a lot of people want to buy space spores.
I think, we're hopeful. We're still working on that problem. We're understanding that the material returned viable, and so we're just trying to get it to a point where we can get those spores to market, and that's the exciting part of it. How much is it different than the spores before they went to space? Who knows? That's for everybody to find out. But
it doesn't matter. It's like when you get Neil Peart's drumstick. It it doesn't matter that I could go buy that drumstick. It matters that Neil Peart touched it. It matters that it came from spores that were in space. Yes.
Right. No, we're super excited about that. That is very much an awesome thing that we're excited to share with the world here. If everything works out to that stuff being available, right?
Fingers crossed. Fingers crossed. All right, guys. Well, this was awesome. John, I've been fortunate. I don't even remember if I think he hopped in my DMs on Instagram and we started chit chatting. And for honestly, I think I already told him this, but for a hot minute, I'm just like, this is some guy pretending to be John Workman. Let's just entertain this conversation for a minute. And
I'm sure that happens.
I finally realized, I think this actually is John Workman. We get to chit chat from time to time. He's occasionally in the live chat on the show, and it's been it's very similar to when I got to get to know John Allen and just build a relationship with some of these iconic people who've done really important things in the space. I really value that. I'm so glad. By the way, guys, I have bugged this guy to come on the show a million times.
Yeah, that is true.
We started talking. He finally did it. I'm so happy.
It was a bit roundabout way.
Yes, it finally happened.
That happened. What 3 days ago? I just said, "Oh yeah, sure, fine."
I was like
Robert's going to be there. It's fine.
Yes, exactly. So. It's cool, man. It's great. And I'm just glad to give you guys a little bit of shine that you deserve in this ever-changing, rapidly expanding, super hyped up space that we're in right now. Flashy. We're in a world of Instagram filters and sound bites and this, that, and the other thing. And we're just taking some time tonight and really get to know you guys, what you're about. I hope everybody, thinks, all right, cool. Yeah, I bought from I got moderators in my Discord who are like, oh yeah, I used to buy from those guys all the time, but now, I'm moving and shaking and doing this, that, and the other thing. So they're going to be real excited to hear about, the new facility, opening up some old drawers and seeing what we got inside. It's going to be a good time. So. Awesome, guys. Thank you so much for coming. And hopefully we can maybe do something like this again. Maybe a little, when you got some exciting stuff coming to the table on sporeworks.com, the space spores for sure. Let me know. We'll pull you guys on for a couple minutes and let everybody know what you're up to.
Right. We appreciate that. It was wonderful to talk to you. Appreciate you taking the time and the mindful approach to our interaction and just the mindful questions. I mean, certainly appreciate talking to people who are well versed in the industry and have their finger on the pulse about what's happening. I mean, like I said earlier, we've kind of been on the sidelines in a lot of ways when it comes to this stuff, just based on being safe and privacy concerns. So it's great to connect with people and kind of talk about these sorts of things and get more of the message out there for folks, but also just to let folks know who we are and in essence and what we've been doing and what we're up to.
Yeah, a new generation. I mean, I'm sure there's customers that have been buying for years that weren't even born when we started.
No, that's very true.
This is a whole new world that we're in right now, and a lot of exciting stuff is happening. And I'm really glad to hear that you guys got something interesting and unique and unknown and mysterious coming our way, and I will be here for it.
Always. Well, thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
Man, what an absolute pleasure it was to sit down with John Workman and Robert Hess of Spore Works. These guys are so good at what they do. I think their mushrooms asked them for advice on how to grow. From the story behind John's iconic APE Cultigen to how they built Spore Works for longevity, this conversation tonight has been pretty inspiring for me. Their impact on the mycology community is unmatched and is still being felt. I'm especially honored to be only the second person in history to record an interview with John, and for me, definite bucket list moment. If you guys are feeling inspired tonight, SporeWorks got you covered. Use promo code GEEKY at checkout. Go to sporeworks.com for 10% off your order right now. So go grab some genetics, and as always, go grow some mushrooms.